C-111 meow. Are there really humans on the other side of the river? Seriously. Laura tilted her head and asked. Big Ears nodded enthusiastically. Of course. I heard it with my own ears. Bulldozer grinned, thinking it was great news that there were humans across the river. This way, he wouldn't be blamed for slacking off, and Big Ears could claim credit for completing his task. A win-win. But Laura thought for a moment and said, we can't even get across the river, though. Huh. Oh. Right. Bulldozer finally realized the problem and turned his gaze toward the other side. They were already on the outskirts of the city. Not far from the riverbank, there was a patch of farmland. It had been abandoned for a long time, overgrown with weeds. Still, that land used to grow potatoes. There was a good chance that some human food was still buried in the soil. Laura and Bulldozer both had sharp eyesight. Even though the distance was considerable, they could faintly see the weeds swaying. Something, or someone, seemed to be moving through them. It was probably humans digging for potatoes. How about I swim over there and grab them? Bulldozer suggested, his eyes fixed on the other side. Laura shot him a disdainful look. Yeah, no. Don't go causing trouble for the boss. So what do we do then? Bulldozer scratched his head, looking confused. Big Ears didn't care about the details. He let out a long sigh of relief. His job was just to find humans. How to bring them back. That wasn't his problem. But this was definitely something he needed to report to the boss. It was a good opportunity to show his value. Ethan was lounging in his clean, well-kept home, absorbing crystal cores and sipping on a drink. Before long, one of his underlings came to report that there were humans spotted near the River Bridge district. At first, Ethan wasn't interested. They weren't from Genesis Biotech, and if they were just ordinary survivors, they'd only end up as zombie fodder. Not much use to him. But after thinking it over, something came to mind. The last time he'd collected tolls, the Bone Claw Zombie King from across the river had stolen one of his prizes. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Let it go. No way. The more he tried to let it slide, the more it felt like a loss. Even if he had to throw the food into the river to feed the fish, he wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of the other side. Besides, he was curious about what was happening over there. In recent weeks, his territory had grown stronger. The Zombie King Sprout had joined his ranks, the Zombie Tiger Snowy was now under his command, and his elite fighters had undergone another evolution. His forces were becoming more powerful by the day. Surely, the other side must have undergone some changes as well. With that thought, Ethan stood up. His body gradually became transparent until he vanished into thin air. Just as Laura and the others had guessed, there were indeed humans digging for potatoes in the fields on the other side of the river. And there weren't just a few of them, there were over 20 people. The leaders of the group were members of the Black Hand Legion from Santa Monica. They had captured more than a dozen refugees and brought them to Los Angeles. Discover exclusive tales on Empire. However, instead of entering Ethan's territory, they had stopped on the far side of the river. Among them was a thin, middle-aged man crouching on the ground, digging through the dirt with his hands. Before long, he unearthed a potato about the size of a fist. The potato was slightly rotten, with a few white worms squirming on its surface. But the man didn't seem to mind. He looked genuinely pleased. Heat gathered in his palm, and a small flame burst forth. The scorching fire roasted the potato, and the worms, until they were fully cooked. Time for a snack, the man said, taking a big bite. He chewed with satisfaction, a look of contentment spreading across his face. Looks like Los Angeles isn't so bad. We haven't even entered the city, and we've already found food. Yeah, it's not bad, said a man with a pointed nose. But I wonder how bad the zombies are in the city. Are they tough? Who cares how tough they are? Let's just dig up as many potatoes as we can and find a place to hide, the middle-aged man replied. Their plan was simple. Keep the refugees they'd captured as livestock, establish a small base, and live like kings for a while. And if the opportunity arose, they could even use the refugees to set traps and lure in more survivors. Don't slack off. Dig faster. If you can't find any potatoes, I'll just use you as food. Blaze barked, turning to glare at the survivors. Yes, Blaze. The terrified survivors nodded frantically, their faces pale with fear. To be fair, the Black Hand Legion had grown faster than any other group in the world, far surpassing Genesis Biotech and even the various zombie kings. Before the apocalypse, the Black Hand Legion was a small, obscure organization with few members. But when the world fell apart, and order collapsed, countless people unleashed the darkness buried deep within them. Like a virus, this darkness spread, and many fell into the abyss. Everyone has both good and evil within them. In normal times, people appear good because their darker impulses remain dormant. But the Black Hand Legion gave people the perfect opportunity to let their evil side take over. Initially, they had captured a dozen survivors. But before long, a few of the younger ones among them had joined the Legion, becoming lackeys. Perhaps others wanted to join too, but they weren't given the chance. Instead, they were enslaved. Or worse, turned into food. Blaze, we should find a place to hide before nightfall. The wilderness isn't safe after dark, Pointed Nose suggested. Blaze looked up at the sky. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. All right, let's head into the city. If we don't find enough food, we'll come back tomorrow to dig some more. Got it, Pointed Nose replied, already thinking about whether they could scavenge some supplies in the city, clothes, blankets, or anything useful. Of course, they wouldn't dare venture into the city center. They'd stick to the outskirts, where it was safer. The group, over 20 strong, began their march toward the city. But none of them noticed the tall, slender figure that appeared shortly after they left. The figure stood silently, watching the direction they had gone. 5 awakeners, 2 with crystal cores, 3 with neurocores, Ethan muttered to himself, analyzing the group. He wasn't particularly impressed. Still, they could serve as bait. He could use them to test the strength of the zombies in the River Bridge district, to see if humans could survive, or how they would die. Of course, he'd make sure to collect the bodies afterward. No way was he leaving anything behind for them. Time passed quickly. The sun set, and the moon rose, casting its silver light over the land. After several days of rain, the sky was finally clear, and the bright moonlight illuminated the night. As darkness fell, the zombies became active, wandering aimlessly through the streets. Their stiff, puppet-like movements were accompanied by low, guttural growls. Blaze and his group had managed to find a place to stay for the night, a clothing store's basement. Though small, it was enough to fit all 20 of them. They had sealed off the entrance and lit a single candle in the pitch-black room. The weak flame flickered, casting shifting shadows on the walls. The conditions are rough for now, but we'll build this place up over time, Blaze said, already planning to use the basement as their base. Once daylight came, they'd scavenge for more supplies, slowly amassing resources and growing stronger. Blaze dreamed of rebuilding his power and achieving greatness once again. Pointed Nose nodded in agreement. The key is that this place is pretty safe. There aren't many zombies around here. Looks like coming to Los Angeles was the right call. Yeah, Blaze muttered, his gaze shifting to the survivors huddled in the corner. A sinister idea began to form in his mind. Now that we're settled in, shouldn't we find a little entertainment? Hey, I was just thinking the same thing, Pointed Nose replied with a sleazy grin. The survivors, sensing their intentions, trembled in fear. They kept their heads down, hoping to avoid drawing attention to themselves. The Black Hand Legion members were notorious for their depravity. No one could predict what horrors they might inflict. But just as Blaze was about to act, a strange sound came from outside the basement door. Meow. It was the cry of a cat, but it sounded eerily like a child's wail. The unsettling noise sent chills down everyone's spine. Blaze immediately tensed, his instincts kicking in. Huh, what was that? C112A Siamese cat. Was that a cat? Pointed Nose frowned. But how could there be a cat in the apocalypse? Could it be a mutant beast? Blaze thought for a moment and said, if it's really just a cat, that's easy to deal with. I'm just worried it's something else. Yeah, Pointed Nose nodded. Meow tilde tilde tilde. Just then, another cat's cry echoed through the dim surroundings, sounding even clearer this time, as if it was getting closer. Blaze and Pointed Nose both frowned deeper. They figured it was necessary to check it out. If there was any real danger, it was better to deal with it early and eliminate the threat. And if it really was just a cat, well, wouldn't that make for a nice meal? Blaze glanced at a man and a woman nearby. Edward, Margaret, you two go check it out. Of course, he wasn't about to risk his own neck for something this dangerous. Better to send a couple of expendables. This. Edward and Margaret froze, exchanging nervous glances. They could see the worry in each other's eyes. Neither of them had any real powers, just basic neurocore awakeners. But Blaze had spoken, and they didn't dare disobey. All right, they reluctantly agreed. Then, to hedge their bets, they picked a few male survivors to come along as cannon fodder. The group of 6 cautiously opened the door, peeking outside. Beyond the door was a long hallway with a staircase leading to the street above. The exit had been sealed tightly, letting in no light. It was pitch black, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Still, with their awakened eyesight, they could just barely make out their surroundings. There's nothing here. It's probably outside, Edward sighed, narrowing his eyes. Before sealing the exit, they'd already checked the interior thoroughly. There shouldn't be any other creatures inside. Margaret swallowed hard, her dry lips trembling. She was visibly nervous. She'd only joined the Black Hand Legion by using her looks to get in. She'd never been in a situation like this before. So, should we head out? Yeah, Edward nodded, then turned to the 4 survivors. You guys go first. What? The 4 men, their faces caked with dirt, looked like they'd just swallowed a fly. But they didn't dare argue. Gritting their teeth, they moved forward. The hallway was so dark that they had to feel their way along the walls as they walked. At one point, one of them accidentally kicked an old soda can, sending it clattering noisily across the floor. Ah, a ghost. The man was so on edge that he scared himself, stumbling back a few steps and landing on his butt. Jesus Christ, you useless idiot. Edward snapped, furious. He kicked the guy hard. Get your ass moving, or I'll kill you myself. Why yes, sir. The young man nodded frantically, his face pale. Thankfully, they made it through the hallway without incident. No danger appeared as they climbed the stairs and reached a large iron door. Edward, it's quiet out there now. Maybe we should just head back and say there's nothing out here. Margaret suggested, already looking for an excuse to retreat. Edward thought about it. It wasn't a bad idea. In times like these, it was best to avoid going outside unless absolutely necessary. Meow tilde tilde tilde. But just then, another cat's cry rang out. This time, it was so close it felt like it was coming from just beyond the door. Damn it. Edward cursed under his breath, his whole body tensing as goosebumps rose on his skin. It looked like they couldn't turn back now. But the thought of opening the door and coming face to face with something terrifying made his stomach churn. What if whatever was out there was waiting to pounce the moment the door opened? Margaret's whole body trembled, and she instinctively took 2 steps back. Stay updated with my virtual library empire. Edward took a deep breath, held it, and carefully unlocked the door. Slowly, he pushed it open. Through the crack in the door, silver moonlight spilled in, and the cool night breeze swept over them, instantly sharpening their senses. There's nothing out there. Edward peered through the gap, expecting something terrifying, but all he saw was emptiness. The street outside was completely still. No monsters, no zombies, nothing. Phew. He finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding and pushed the door open all the way. The scene outside was eerily calm. The street was a mess, littered with debris, but bathed in soft moonlight. Not even a single zombie was in sight. But as they scanned the area, their eyes landed on something unusual, a plump, orange figure sprawled lazily on top of a trash can. It was round and fat, like a furry little meatball. A Siamese cat. It really is just a cat. Edward muttered, finally letting his guard down. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. All that fear for nothing. Margaret, however, frowned. Edward, don't you think it's weird? That cat's way too fat. In the middle of the apocalypse, what's it been eating to get that big? Maybe rats. There are plenty of them in the sewers, Edward guessed. Margaret nodded. That made sense. Her nerves eased a little. Should we catch it? I mean, it's meat, right? We could finally have something decent to eat. Of course. Edward grinned. He quickly ordered the 4 survivors to surround the Siamese cat, forming a loose circle to block its escape. Meanwhile, he crept forward, step by step, trying not to startle it. Here, kitty, don't run. I've got something tasty for you, he cooed softly. The Siamese cat stared at him, unblinking. But as Edward got within about 20 feet, it suddenly let out a strange, sharp, meow. And leapt off the trash can, bolting into the distance. The survivors scrambled to block its path, but despite its chubby appearance, the cat was incredibly agile. It darted and weaved, slipping right under one man's legs before anyone could react. Fuck. Useless idiots. Edward cursed, his frustration boiling over. Chase it. Don't let it get away. Without hesitation, they all took off after the cat. Edward and Margaret, being Neurocore Awakeners, didn't have any special abilities, but their enhanced physical strength made them much faster than the average person. In no time, the group disappeared into the darkness, chasing the elusive feline. Back at the original spot, Ethan stood watching, his expression calm but his mind racing. He could already sense it, the presence of the one controlling the cat's soul. Whoever was behind this was about to reveal themselves. He couldn't help but feel curious. What kind of creature could it be? At the same time, two powerful auras were closing in. Both were zombie kings, high-level ones, at that. In the eastern region of the river, there were two known zombie kings, Cat-Faced and Bone Claw. But this third one, its identity was still a mystery. One thing was certain, though, bloodshed was imminent. Meanwhile, Edward and the others had chased the cat for over 500 feet. But no matter how fast they ran, they couldn't keep up. The Siamese cat, despite its size, was far too quick. Eventually, they lost sight of it. Stop, Edward ordered, raising a hand to halt the group. The survivors, already weak from hunger, were gasping for air. They hadn't even run far before they were completely out of breath. We can't keep chasing it. There might be danger ahead, Edward sighed, squinting into the distance. Under the moonlight, he could just barely make out shadowy figures moving in the far-off streets. Zombies, wandering aimlessly. Yeah, the survivors nodded eagerly. They hadn't wanted to chase the cat in the first place but had been forced to follow orders. Finally, we can head back, one of them muttered, relieved. But just as they were about to turn around, Margaret suddenly froze. Her body stiffened, and she began trembling violently, as if she'd just seen something horrifying. Edward, she stammered, her voice shaking. Look at the rooftop of that building. C-113 Prey. Huh. Edward followed Margaret's gaze and spotted a hunched old woman standing on the rooftop of a tall building ahead. What made his skin crawl was her appearance. Half of her face was human, while the other half resembled a cat. The sight was downright eerie. But what was even more terrifying was what she was doing. The old woman was kneeling on the rooftop, hands clasped together in prayer, bowing toward the bright full moon hanging in the sky. The moonlight bathed her half-human, half-cat face, making her look disturbingly devout, almost fanatical. The scene was chilling, like some ancient, sinister ritual. This is so creepy. Edward felt a shiver run down his spine, his scalp tingling as cold sweat broke out all over his body. The sight of a cat-faced old woman worshipping the moon was something straight out of a nightmare. Phantom infected. Run. It's a phantom infected, Edward blurted out instinctively. But the four survivors standing nearby didn't react. They just stood there, frozen, as if they hadn't heard him. Suddenly, a sharp, meow tilde tilde tilde, erupted from one of their mouths. The next moment, all four of their eyes transformed, becoming cat-like, their pupils narrowing into needle-thin slits. Continue your saga on my virtual library empire. What the hell? Edward's heart nearly stopped, his scalp prickling with fear. One of the survivors, a young man, suddenly grinned wickedly and spoke in a raspy voice. Hey there, little one. Don't run. I've got something tasty for you. The tone was disturbingly familiar. It was the same voice Edward had used when trying to catch a Siamese cat once. What the hell is going on? Edward's mind was in chaos. The events of the day had gone from strange to outright horrifying. Without thinking, he turned and bolted. Margaret, standing beside him, hadn't been possessed by the cat spirits either. But faced with such a terrifying scene, even a man would be paralyzed with fear, let alone her. She couldn't help but cry out in a trembling voice. Edward, wait for me. The two of them ran as fast as they could, pushing their bodies to the limit. But the survivors, now possessed, seemed to have gained the speed and agility of cats. They were unnaturally fast, closing the distance between them and Edward and Margaret with alarming ease. Even compared to awakeners who had developed neurocores, these possessed survivors were just as fast, if not faster. The gap between them was shrinking. Margaret, run faster, Edward shouted, his voice filled with urgency. I'm trying. Margaret nodded frantically, but as she glanced at Edward out of the corner of her eye, a selfish thought crept into her mind. If this keeps up, I'm going to die. Her face twisted with desperation. Gritting her teeth, she clenched her fist and swung it hard at Edward's face. Edward, I'm sorry. I don't want to die. She sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Margaret, you. Edward staggered from the blow. Already unsteady from running, he lost his balance and fell to the ground, tumbling forward several times from the momentum. In that brief moment, the four possessed survivors caught up to him. They pounced on him like feral cats, clawing and biting at him with inhuman ferocity. Edward's clothes were shredded, his skin torn open, and pain shot through his body. As he lay there, his gaze locked onto Margaret's fleeing figure. He reached out a trembling hand toward her, his heart consumed by a tidal wave of hatred. But his strength quickly faded, and his hand fell limp to the ground. Something's wrong. We need to get out of here. Blaze stood at the entrance of the basement, his expression grim as he peered outside. Having survived the apocalypse for so long, his sharp instincts told him that something was very, very off. Yeah, Pointed Nose agreed, nodding as he glanced back into the basement. Blaze, what about the survivors? Are you kidding me? At a time like this? Leave them. Let them be bait, Blaze said decisively. He figured the survivors could serve as a distraction, buying them some time to escape. With their minds made up, the two of them immediately took off. But the cat-faced old woman on the rooftop had already sensed their presence. With a powerful leap, she jumped to another building, pursuing them with terrifying speed. It was clear she wasn't going to let them go. At the same time, two figures appeared at the corner of the street, two zombie kings. One of them was the Bone Claw Zombie King, a notorious figure in the eastern region of the river. The other was the third zombie king, a woman. Her body was thin and frail, her limbs bony and weak, making her look as though a gust of wind could knock her over. But her stomach was grotesquely swollen, round and bulging as if it were about to burst. Beneath her stretched skin, the outline of a zombie fetus could be faintly seen, writhing and shifting. She had been infected while heavily pregnant, and her horrifying appearance was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. So many prey. No way I'm letting that old hag take them all. Bone Claw said with a sinister grin. In the post-apocalyptic city, humans were a rare delicacy. Now that a few had shown up, there was no way the zombie kings were going to let the opportunity slip by. Even among the zombie kings, there was competition. Each of them wanted to claim as much of the feast as they could. Oh, the pregnant zombie king let out a chilling, sinister laugh. Then how about we play a little game? Let's see who can catch more prey. Hey, no problem. As soon as the words left her mouth, Bone Claw's back crackled with a sharp, snapping sound. A pair of skeletal wings unfolded, and with a powerful leap, he shot into the night sky, disappearing into the darkness. In such a rush. The pregnant zombie king didn't seem bothered. Her eerie gaze swept across the area as she began searching for her own prey. Meanwhile, Margaret was still running for her life. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the snot dripping from her nose. She was utterly consumed by despair. The survivors who had been possessed by the cat spirits had finished tearing Edward apart and were now chasing after her. In the darkness, the four blood-soaked figures closed in. Their faces and bodies were smeared with gore, bits of flesh still stuck under their claws. Their glowing cat-like eyes gleamed with a sinister light, making them even more terrifying than zombies. The monsters were getting closer and closer. Margaret's heart pounded with panic, and the overwhelming fear, combined with her rapidly draining stamina, pushed her to the brink of collapse. What do I do? Just as she was about to give into despair, a tall figure appeared in the dim light ahead. The faint glow of the moon illuminated his sharp, chiseled features, making him look strikingly handsome. His crisp white shirt seemed to shimmer faintly under the moonlight, adding an almost ethereal quality to his presence. Am I seeing things? Margaret shook her head, thinking she must be hallucinating from exhaustion. Even before the apocalypse, she had never seen a man this good-looking. The man, seemingly oblivious to her plight, muttered to himself. Go ahead and hunt your prey. I'll clean up the mess for you. He sounded almost considerate, as if he were doing someone a favor. The four possessed survivors, however, didn't care who he was. Their feral instincts took over as they let out sharp, guttural, meow. Meow sounds, their bodies tensing like coiled springs before they lunged at him with terrifying speed. The man didn't move. He stood there, calm and composed, his posture straight and unyielding. As the four figures closed in, a tachi appeared in his hand, its blade gleaming coldly under the moonlight. In a single, fluid motion, he swung the blade. Swish, swish. The sound of steel slicing through flesh echoed in the night. The blade cut cleanly, and in the blink of an eye, the four heads were severed from their bodies. The decapitated heads hit the ground with dull thuds, rolling a few times before coming to a stop. The entire scene unfolded in an instant. His movements were graceful, almost like a dance, each strike precise and effortless, as if he were painting strokes on a canvas. He's that strong. Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief. She was completely stunned. These monstrous creatures, which had seemed unstoppable, were dispatched so easily. Her gaze shifted back to the man's face. His striking features, combined with his effortless strength, made him seem like a savior descending from the heavens. In that moment, he appeared to be glowing, a beacon of hope in her darkest hour. Please. Save me. Margaret sobbed, her voice trembling as she cried out for help. Her vulnerability and desperation made her look pitiful, like a fragile flower battered by the storm. The man, however, remained unfazed. Oh, sure, he replied casually. Then, without hesitation, he raised his blade and swung it toward her. C-114 lambs. Be free. Ethan's blade sliced cleanly through the woman's neck, and her headless body collapsed to the ground. Another terrified soul, liberated. After killing Margaret and the 4 remaining survivors, Ethan collected their bodies and stepped into the dimly lit street ahead. Lying on the ground was Edward's corpse, mangled and torn apart, his blood pooling into a dark, sticky puddle. Under the silver glow of the moonlight, the blood shimmered with a faint crimson hue. A few stray cats had gathered around. Their tongues flicked out as they lapped at the blood, smacking their lips as if drinking milk. Others gnawed on Edward's flesh, their jaws stained red with blood. Enjoying your meal? Ethan's voice broke the silence as he approached, his figure moving steadily closer. The cats froze, their ears flattening as they turned to face him. Their fur bristled, backs arched, and low growls rumbled from their throats. They looked ready to defend their feast but hesitated, as if sensing something far more dangerous than hunger. Ethan found their defiance adorable. Without hesitation, he unleashed his domain of the dead. The moment the cats were enveloped by its power, their growls ceased abruptly. A sickening crackling sound filled the air as their bones shattered all at once. In an instant, the cats dropped lifeless to the ground. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan collected Edward's corpse, along with the dead cats. Meat was meat, after all, no matter how small. Meanwhile, in the basement of a clothing store, a group of survivors sat in tense silence, exchanging uneasy glances. Blaze and his companion had left earlier, and the absence of their captors sparked a flicker of hope. Where are those 2 psychos? Someone whispered. No idea. They went out a while ago, another replied. If they're gone, does that mean we can escape? The group fell silent, the possibility hanging in the air like a fragile thread. For those who had suffered under the Black Hand Legion, enslaved, tortured, and abused, escape was the only way to reclaim even a shred of dignity. Staying meant a fate worse than death. This might be our only chance, a young man with a dirt-streaked face said, breaking the silence. We can't just sit here waiting to die. We should leave. Now. Several others nodded in agreement, their eyes lighting up with determination. But not everyone shared their optimism. Leave. And go where? An older man countered, his voice steady but laced with fear. The streets are crawling with zombies. We'd be walking straight into our graves. I say we barricade the door and stay put. Wait until morning, then figure out our next move. He's right. It's too dangerous out there. Someone else chimed in. Yeah, better to stay here and see what happens. Rushing out now would be suicide. The group splintered into 2 camps, those who wanted to stay in the relative safety of the basement and those who were desperate to take their chances outside. Fine, the young man said, standing up decisively. Anyone who wants to leave, come with me. The rest of you can stay here and wait for whatever happens next. 4 or 5 people, both men and women, stood up to join him. We're with you, one of them said. Good, the young man replied, nodding. He walked toward a corner of the basement where a pile of potatoes they had dug up earlier was stored. The older man frowned, his expression darkening. Hey, what are you doing? Taking some food, the young man said matter-of-factly. We'll need it if we're going to survive out there. No way, the older man snapped, stepping forward. If you want to leave, fine. But the food stays here. Why not? We all dug those potatoes up together. How about we split them evenly? The young man argued. Absolutely not. The older man barked. Food was too precious to give up, especially now. If you leave empty-handed. The young man's face twisted with anger, but he didn't back down. I'm taking some, whether you like it or not. What are you gonna do about it? Stop. Right there. The older man shouted, lunging at him. The 2 men collided, grappling and shouting as they wrestled for control. Their scuffle quickly escalated, drawing the attention of the others. Chaos erupted as people rushed toward the pile of potatoes. Some, driven by hunger, grabbed raw potatoes and began gnawing on them. Others fought to snatch the food away, fists flying and voices raised in anger. The basement descended into utter pandemonium. Ha ha ha. A bunch of food fighting amongst themselves. A sinister, chilling laugh echoed from the basement doorway. Who's there? The survivors froze, their brawl forgotten as they turned toward the sound. Standing in the doorway was a woman, or what was left of one. Her dry, stringy hair hung in clumps, obscuring one eye, while the other eye gleamed with a pinprick pupil that seemed to pierce through the dim light. Her face was ashen, her expression unnervingly blank, but it was her body that truly horrified them. Her limbs were thin and frail, but her abdomen was grotesquely swollen, bulging as though something inside was ready to burst free. Beneath the stretched, translucent skin of her belly, the faint outline of a baby could be seen shifting unnaturally. The survivors gasped in unison, their fear palpable. Zombie King. It's a zombie king. What do? We need to get out of here. Now. But the pregnant zombie king was already moving toward them, her steps slow but deliberate, her face twisted into an expression of manic glee. She radiated death, like a reaper closing in on her prey. The survivors huddled together, trembling like lambs awaiting slaughter. The young man who had argued earlier suddenly had an idea. In a desperate bid to save himself, he shoved the older man forward with both hands. Hey, you little bastard! The older man screamed, his voice cracking with terror. He stumbled forward, his heart pounding as he turned to curse the young man. But before he could say another word, a sharp, icy pain pierced his chest. He looked down in horror to see the zombie king's clawed hand buried deep in his torso. Blood poured from the wound, and when he looked up, her grotesque face was inches from his own. With a sickening squelch, she ripped his heart out, her fingers dripping with blood as it oozed between them. Ha 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 tilde tilde tilde. The survivors stared in frozen terror, their teeth chattering as they watched the gruesome scene unfold. Run! Someone finally screamed, breaking the spell. Panic erupted. The group scattered, each person scrambling for the exit in a blind frenzy. But the pregnant zombie king was faster. Her claws lashed out, slicing through flesh with ease. Blood sprayed across the walls as screams filled the air. One by one, survivors fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground in lifeless heaps. She moved through them like a predator in a chicken coop, savoring the chaos and carnage. Anyone who crossed her path met a swift, brutal end. The basement had become a slaughterhouse. Amid the chaos, she grabbed a young woman by the throat, her bony fingers tightening like a vice. The girl thrashed and screamed, tears streaming down her face. Please. No. Let me go. She sobbed, her voice breaking into a desperate wail. The zombie king ignored her pleas. Instead, she began forcing the girl toward her grotesquely swollen belly. No. No. Please. The girl shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Read the latest on my virtual library empire. The bulging stomach began to shift, and the outline of tiny hands pressed against the skin from the inside. With a wet, tearing sound, the belly split open, revealing a pair of bloodied infant hands that reached out and grabbed the girl's hair. The girl screamed in agony as the monstrous baby pulled her head toward the gaping wound. Ah! Her cries were cut short as her upper body was dragged into the zombie king's abdomen. The sound of bones snapping and flesh tearing filled the air, followed by the sickening crunch of chewing. The survivors who remained could only watch in horror, their legs frozen in place. Heh heh, eat up, my little one, the pregnant zombie king cooed, her lips curling into a grotesque smile. But in the brief moment she was distracted, a handful of survivors managed to slip past her and escape through the doorway. They stumbled into the night, their breaths ragged, their faces pale with terror. Back in the basement, the zombie king's stomach began to heal itself, the torn flesh knitting back together as though nothing had happened. Her belly was now even larger, grotesquely round and taut, as if the feast had only made her hunger grow. She turned slowly, her gaze locking onto the fleeing survivors. With deliberate steps, she began to follow, her movements unhurried but relentless. The hunt was far from over. C-115 unsettling. At that moment, Ethan had just finished collecting Edward and the cat's corpse. From a distance, he heard screams echoing down the street, followed by the frantic sounds of people running. It was easy to sense the presence of humans, and the zombies chasing after them. Without hesitation, Ethan started walking in that direction. It didn't take long for him to arrive at a basement that had just witnessed a massacre. The stench of blood was overwhelming. The once pristine white walls were smeared with dark, dried blood, and the floor was littered with bodies in grotesque positions. Some of the corpses had been half-eaten, leaving behind a horrifying scene. Guess I'll take whatever leftovers I can get, Ethan muttered, unfazed. With a wave of his hand, he collected all the food into his storage. After finishing up, he returned to the street. Scanning the area, he spotted more bodies scattered along the roadside, not far from where he stood. Judging by the scene, these were likely people who had just been caught and killed by the zombies while trying to escape. So, Ethan continued walking, casually, collecting corpses along the way. Meanwhile, Blaze and Pointed Nose were still running for their lives. The crystal cores in their heads were worth 10 times more than the bodies of ordinary survivors. They were the real targets of the Zombie King's relentless pursuit. As they ran, both kept glancing over their shoulders, a growing sense of dread gnawing at them. Why do I feel like something's watching us? Blaze muttered, frowning. Don't say that, man. You're freaking me out, Pointed Nose replied, his face tense with anxiety. But deep down, he could feel it too, something terrifying was closing in on them. Let's just keep moving. Yeah, Blaze nodded quickly, picking up his pace. But up ahead, zombies were already wandering the street. Their noses twitched as they caught the scent of the two men. In unison, the zombies turned their heads, locking their lifeless eyes on them. Rog. The zombies let out guttural roars, as if suddenly awakened, and charged at them with feral aggression. Damn it! Blaze cursed under his breath. He had no choice but to fight his way through. Without hesitation, he activated his fire ability. Raising his hand, a blazing flame erupted from his palm, surging forward like a fiery dragon and engulfing the zombies in its path. The zombies caught in the flames were quickly reduced to charred remains, leaving behind only piles of ash and the acrid stench of burnt flesh. Pointed Nose wasn't idle either. As a strength awakened, he relied on brute force. With a few powerful punches, he sent zombies flying, his movements swift and brutal. Phew, at least they're just regular zombies, Pointed Nose said, relieved. Don't let your guard down, Blaze warned. Finish them off quickly. We don't want to trigger a full-blown zombie horde. Got it. Pointed Nose nodded. He delivered an uppercut to one zombie's jaw, sending it airborne before it crashed back to the ground with a sickening thud. But just then, a sharp sound cut through the air. Whoosh. Something darted across the sky, its shadow stretching ominously across the ground under the moonlight. What the hell was that? Pointed Nose's eyes widened in alarm. Blaze's face turned pale with fear. It's a mutated zombie king. What? Pointed Nose's expression instantly grew tense. You mean that thing's been tracking us this whole time? Kahahehe. Found you. A figure descended from the sky, landing with a heavy thud. Behind him, a pair of skeletal wings folded back with a series of unsettling cracks. In the moonlight, he took on the appearance of a young man, but his emaciated frame was horrifying. His skin clung tightly to his bones, and his hands were nothing but exposed white bone, gleaming eerily in the dark. Blaze, is this the Zombie King? What's his level? Pointed Nose asked urgently. Blaze hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. He's not that strong. Just a B level. Oh, that's not too bad. Pointed Nose nodded, slightly reassured. Some zombies looked terrifying, but their levels didn't always match their appearance. Since his own strength was above B level, he felt confident he could take this Zombie King down. Experience tales with my virtual library empire. Leave this to me, Pointed Nose said, his body tensing as he gathered his strength. Then, like an enraged bull, he charged straight at the skeletal figure. The Bone Claw Zombie King tilted his head, watching the charging man with mild curiosity. This food is actually coming at me on its own. Who gave him the courage? With that, the Zombie King clenched his bony hand into a fist and swung it toward Pointed Nose. Pointed Nose didn't even try to dodge. Seeing how the Bone Claw Zombie King looked like a walking skeleton, as thin as a matchstick, he figured it didn't have much strength. He decided to take the hit head on. Bam! The sound of their fists colliding was like two sledgehammers smashing together. Pointed Nose, as a strength awakened, had a powerful physique, but the moment their fists connected, his arm let out a sickening crack. His bones shattered instantly, twisting his arm into an unnatural shape. His body was flung backward like he'd been hit by a speeding train, flying dozens of feet through the air before crashing into a wrecked car. The impact crumpled the vehicle, and only then did he finally come to a stop. HSS's. The searing pain was unbearable, nearly causing him to pass out. He couldn't move a muscle, his body was completely paralyzed. How is it this strong? Pointed Nose couldn't believe it. How could the Bone Claw Zombie King, with its frail, skeletal frame, unleash such terrifying power? Wait a second. This thing couldn't possibly be just B level. Realizing something was off, Pointed Nose turned his head toward Blaze, only to see him sprinting away in the distance. Blaze had taken advantage of the fight to make his escape, and his silhouette was already fading into the darkness. Fuck. That bastard set me up. It was obvious now. Blaze had lied about the Bone Claw Zombie King being B-level. He'd done it to give Pointed Nose the confidence to fight, buying himself time to run. Had their own way of killing without lifting a finger. Betrayal. The Bone Claw Zombie King wasn't about to let Blaze get away. Just as it was about to give chase, a figure appeared on the rooftop above. A half-human, half-cat old woman. Her sharp eyes were also locked on Blaze's fleeing figure. The Bone Claw Zombie King tilted its head and glared at her. Hey, old hag, why are you everywhere I go? That's my prey. Ha. So what if you saw him first? Whoever catches him gets to keep him. The cat-faced old woman sneered, clearly unimpressed. The Bone Claw Zombie King frowned. The two zombie kings had never gotten along. You've already caught a few humans, haven't you? It asked. Only children make choices, the cat-faced old woman replied smugly. Her meaning was clear. She wanted them all. But before the argument could escalate, another figure appeared at the corner of the street. It was the pregnant zombie king, her body covered in blood and her expression wild with excitement. She, too, was here for Blaze. Well then, the Bone Claw Zombie King said, narrowing its eyes, why don't we see who gets to him first? Fine by me. Let's see what you've got. The cat-faced old woman smirked. Bring it on. The pregnant zombie king licked her lips, clearly eager for the hunt. The Bone Claw Zombie King's skeletal wings began to creak and shift, preparing to unfurl. But just as it was about to take off, it froze mid-motion. Its expression turned strange, almost confused. Blaze's scent had suddenly vanished. What the? Where did he go? The Bone Claw Zombie King muttered, scanning the area. Something's not right, the cat-faced old woman said from the rooftop, her expression growing serious. The humans I killed earlier, their bodies are gone. And a few of my cats have been killed, too. Hearing this, the pregnant zombie king immediately turned to look back in the direction she'd come from. She sniffed the air, her nose twitching. The scent of blood on the street had noticeably faded. The Bone Claw Zombie King glanced at her. Don't tell me your kills have disappeared too. Yeah, it looks like they have, the pregnant zombie king replied, her brow furrowing. The three zombie kings felt a chill run through them. In an instant, all the prey they'd killed had vanished without a trace, as if it had been swallowed by thin air. Even in the zombie world, this was something deeply unsettling. C-116 cat paw biscuits. Something's wrong. Something must have snuck in. The Bone Claw Zombie King quickly realized what was happening. At the same time, every zombie in the city let out a feral, blood-curdling howl and began converging from all directions. The once silent night was completely shattered. The entire city stirred with chaos. Following the Bone Claw Zombie King's command, the zombies began searching for the intruder. Among them were elite zombies, leaping between buildings with the agility of apes, their movements swift and precise. But amidst the turmoil, the Bone Claw, cat-faced, and pregnant zombie kings all turned their gazes toward the direction where Blaze had mysteriously vanished. A sense of unease crept into their hearts. Overhead, a thick cloud drifted across the sky, blotting out the once bright moonlight. Darkness engulfed the world. The night wind howled, carrying a chilling edge. On the street ahead, a tall, slender figure began to materialize, slowly emerging from the shadows. That's the Bone Claw Zombie King frowned, his gaze locking onto the figure's strikingly handsome face and pristine white shirt. Recognition dawned on him. It was Ethan. The three zombie kings were stunned. They hadn't expected the zombie king from across the river to infiltrate their territory. Though they were cruel and ferocious by nature, they couldn't help but grow cautious, their expressions tense as if facing a formidable enemy. This is our turf. He wouldn't dare cause trouble. Here, right. The pregnant zombie king glanced behind her. The massive zombie horde was closing in, an unstoppable force that no individual could hope to withstand. This gave her a sliver of confidence. But Ethan's expression remained cold and indifferent. He showed no fear. Instead, he began walking toward the three zombie kings, step by step. What's he doing? The Bone Claw Zombie King instinctively took half a step back. The pregnant zombie king's face twisted in disbelief. No way. Is he seriously planning to attack us on our own turf? Before the words had fully left his mouth, Ethan's eyes flashed with a crimson glow. In an instant, the terrifying domain of the dead unfolded, unleashing an overwhelming pressure that swept across the area like a tidal wave. To the three zombie kings, Ethan stood alone, but behind him, it was as if a sea of blood churned and roared, radiating an oppressive, suffocating aura. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Ethan's figure blurred, rushing toward them like a violent storm, carrying an unstoppable momentum that made it hard to breathe. Retreat! The Bone Claw Zombie King roared, his voice sharp with urgency. He darted backward at full speed, trying to escape the crushing pressure of the domain of the dead. His plan was to regroup with his elite forces before engaging Ethan head-on. The cat-faced and pregnant zombie kings followed suit, retreating nearly 500 feet in a panic. But, to their surprise, Ethan didn't pursue them. Instead, he stopped beside the corpse of Pointed Nose, casually waved his hand, and collected the body. I told you I wouldn't leave you a single one. And I meant it. You. The Bone Claw Zombie King stared in shock, his expression frozen. A wave of humiliation surged through him. Ethan had only come to retrieve a corpse, yet he had managed to scare them into retreating so far. By now, the streets of the city trembled as countless zombies gathered, forming a massive horde that surged toward the scene. Their grotesque faces began to emerge from the shadows of the street corners. Some of the elite zombies climbed onto rooftops and walls, crouching like rabid beasts, their glowing eyes fixed on the ground below. Ethan scanned his surroundings, assessing the situation. He decided it wasn't worth the risk to stay any longer. All right, I'll finish you off next time. See you around. He tilted his head back slightly, his tone calm, as if stating an undeniable fact. Then, in the blink of an eye, his figure vanished without a trace. Damn it. The Bone Claw Zombie King clenched his teeth so hard it felt like they might shatter. He knew there was no way to stop Ethan now, and the humiliation burned deep in his chest. Ethan had entered their territory, taken what he wanted, and left behind a parting shot that dripped with disdain. For a moment, anger, frustration, and helplessness swirled in the Bone Claw Zombie King's mind, a storm of negative emotions he couldn't suppress. Roar! He threw his head back and let out a furious howl. The surrounding zombies echoed his rage, their collective howls shaking the city to its core. But in the end, it all felt like nothing more than a futile outburst of anger. Ethan used the stealth ability of his domain of the dead to move swiftly, his figure darting through the shadows. Before long, he crossed the river bridge and returned to his own territory. Waiting for him were Bulldozer, Laura, Sprout, and the freelance zombie, Big Ears. Behind them, a sizable group of zombies had gathered. They had heard the furious howls from across the river and assumed something major had happened. Many were ready to charge across the bridge to provide backup if necessary. Hey, boss, you're back. So, was it humans on the other side? Big Ears asked with a fawning grin. Discover exclusive tales on my virtual library empire. Not anymore. Ethan waved his hand, and with a flick of his wrist, he released the prey he had collected. Over 20 corpses tumbled out, scattered haphazardly on the ground. Among them were several cat zombies. Whoa! Bulldozer's eyes widened in amazement. He couldn't help but admire Ethan. The boss is something else. Even on another zombie king's turf, he managed to snag this much prey. Not just the main course, but even some snacks. Ethan glanced at them and gave a quick reminder. Stay alert and keep an eye on the other side. I don't know if they'll lose their cool and try to charge over. The river bridge was a natural choke point, easy to defend, hard to attack. Any force trying to cross would be at a disadvantage. Got it, boss. Don't worry. If they dare come over, I'll wipe them out. Bulldozer thumped his chest and promised with enthusiasm. Eat up. Ethan's figure vanished again, heading back to his high-rise home. Fortunately, the other side didn't make any rash moves. After a few howls of impotent rage, they quieted down, clearly deciding against an immediate attack. With the tension easing, Bulldozer and the other zombies began their feast, a bloody banquet. Big Ears, however, being a freelance zombie, wasn't part of the inner circle. He stood off to the side, watching the feast with drool dripping from his mouth. He couldn't help but feel envious. Since the apocalypse began, he'd never seen such a luxurious spread. They're already eating. Why hasn't anyone invited me? Big Ears muttered to himself, feeling awkward as he stood there, empty-handed. After some hesitation, he shuffled forward, trying to find someone approachable. He nudged Bulldozer with his elbow, hoping to strike up a conversation. Hey, Bulldozer, didn't you say before, if I needed anything, I could come to you? Yeah, that's right. What's up? Bulldozer turned to look at him. Ha ha ha. Big Ears chuckled nervously. Mind if I Join in for a meal. Oh, sure. No problem. After all, you did help spot the prey earlier. You deserve a share. Bulldozer nodded enthusiastically. Big Ear's eyes lit up with excitement. Bulldozer's the real deal. A zombie of his word. He thought, feeling a surge of gratitude. He rubbed his hands together like a fly, his face full of anticipation as he waited. Bulldozer rummaged through the pile of corpses for a moment before casually pulling out a dead cat. Huh, just this. Big Ears froze, his excitement fading into disappointment. This is the good stuff you were talking about. Cat meat was notoriously sour. It worked as a light snack to whet the appetite, but it wasn't exactly a delicacy. Before Big Ears could say anything, Bulldozer snapped off one of the cat's paws with a loud crack and handed it to him. Here you go, cat paw biscuits. You deserve it. Eat up. Don't hold back. Quote. Big Ears stared at the paw, his face blank, a dark cloud forming over his head. Seriously. This is what I get. The sting of disappointment hit him hard. His heart ached. C-117 The Crimson Titan. Ethan returned home. The long, dark night passed uneventfully, and by dawn, there was still no sign of an attack from across the river. However, the massive zombie horde gathered on the other side showed no signs of dispersing. Instead, they seemed restless, as if preparing for something big. Not long ago, 3 zombie kings, Bone Claw, Cat-Faced, and Pregnant, had gathered at the heart of the zombie nest. Surrounding them were elite zombies, and in the center of a small plaza stood a towering figure. This was the 4th zombie king of the eastern region of the river, and the undisputed ruler of the area, the Crimson Titan. He was the absolute overlord of this territory. Standing at a staggering 9 feet tall, his massive frame was covered in reddish-brown skin that looked like it was made of solid rock. His body was completely hairless, and his bald head was marked with deep grooves, giving him an intimidating, battle-hardened appearance. It was the kind of look that screamed power. Boss, let's cross the bridge and crush them. Bone Claw Zombie King growled angrily. The Crimson Titan remained silent for a moment, deep in thought. He had already heard about what happened the previous night. I'm afraid the timing isn't right yet. What do you mean it's not the right time? When will it ever be the right time? They've already come knocking on our door. Bone Claw snapped, clearly unable to swallow his anger. The Crimson Titan raised his gaze and said calmly, the enemy is no pushover. Even if we win, we'll suffer heavy losses. That'll leave us vulnerable to other factions. Come on, boss. Once you absorb that Zombie King's crystal core, you'll still be the top dog in Los Angeles, Pregnant Zombie King chimed in with a sinister tone. It was clear she supported an all-out attack. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come here with Bone Claw. The Crimson Titan liked what he was hearing. Her words hit him right in his weak spot, and he couldn't help but want to hear more. What did you just say? I said, you'll still be the #1 overlord of Los Angeles, Pregnant Zombie King repeated. The Crimson Titan nodded, satisfied. Of course, a high-level crystal core was a tempting prize for him, especially since he felt like he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He just needed one final push. Seeing his subordinates so fired up, he decided to go along with their plan. In the back of his mind, though, he was already calculating his options. If things went south, they could always retreat and defend their position. Worst case scenario, they could destroy the bridge and cut off the enemy entirely. With the terrain on their side, they wouldn't lose too badly. Over the next few days, zombies from the eastern region of the river began to gather in greater numbers. They even absorbed smaller factions from the surrounding areas, like the group led by Big Ears, who were more like freelancers than a proper force. As the zombie horde grew larger, their numbers soon swelled to over 40,000. The sight was terrifying. An endless sea of grotesque faces, packed so tightly together it made Disneyland's holiday lines look like a breeze. Meanwhile, Ethan kept a close eye on the enemy's movements. He frequently sent out Buddy Crow, his red-eyed raven, to scout the area from above. When he noticed the horde wasn't dispersing but instead growing larger, he quickly pieced together their intentions. Time to gather our forces, Ethan said decisively. A red-eyed crow flew out from the windowsill, cawing loudly as it soared into the sky, its sharp cries echoing through the air. Ethan's commanders were immediately energized. Especially the 500 elite warriors. Since their evolution, they hadn't had the chance to experience a real battle. Now, they were itching for bloodshed. One by one, zombies began pouring out. There was the towering bulldozer, the ghostly Laura, the zombie tiger Snowy, and the elusive little shadow, each leading their own squads to assemble. Among them was PhD, whose left eye was equipped with a cybernetic scanner. Bulldozer glanced at him and said, "I've been itching to crush those guys on the other side. Can you scan their ranks later? See if they've got any SB-class zombies." "No need," PhD replied confidently, shaking his head. "They definitely don't." Ellipsis. Ethan's zombie army quickly grew to nearly 30,000, with 5,000 elite troops, including the 500 elite warriors. "We're going to need reinforcements," Ethan muttered as he lounged on the sofa. Picking up his phone, he sent a message to Mia, as well as a few Ice Element Awakeners he'd recruited recently to act as builders. Now, with two massive zombie factions gathering, the entire apocalyptic city was on edge, teetering on the brink of war. Even Genesis Biotech had taken notice. The sheer size of the zombie horde in the city forced them to act. Countless drones zipped through the skies, observing the chaos below. Nathan sat in his office, staring at the massive screen in front of him. The live feed displayed a scene that made his jaw drop. Holy crap. That's a lot of zombies. This was, without a doubt, the largest gathering of zombies Los Angeles had seen since the apocalypse began. Before the outbreak, Los Angeles County had a population of around 10 million. But on the day the world fell apart, 70% of the population perished almost instantly. The survivors either fled, hid in shelters, or, unfortunately, became zombies. Among the undead, many were mindless and posed little threat, but the massive zombie horde now gathering was a terrifying exception. "Boss, what are they planning to do? They're not coming for us, are they?" asked his newly hired assistant, her voice trembling slightly with fear. She was stunning. Dressed in a pencil skirt and black stockings, her curvaceous figure exuded elegance and charm. Her beauty was undeniable, and if Justin were still alive to see her, he'd probably accuse Nathan of orchestrating his death just to hire her. "They shouldn't be coming for us," Nathan replied, narrowing his eyes at the screen. "Those two zombie nests are about to go to war. The battle would determine who the true overlord of Los Angeles was." It was an inevitable development in the post-apocalyptic world. Nathan couldn't help but start calculating which zombie king winning would be more beneficial to him. But no matter how he looked at it, the answer was the same. Neither outcome was good. Whoever emerged victorious would pose a massive threat to Genesis Biotech. The company had over 1,000 Awakeners and access to advanced tech weaponry, but even that wouldn't be enough to fend off a massive zombie horde. Especially not one with nearly 10,000 elite zombies and multiple zombie kings with bizarre and deadly abilities. "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Nathan muttered to himself. He couldn't afford to let either side grow too powerful. Ideally, the two factions would destroy each other, leaving him to swoop in and eliminate the remaining zombie kings. But the odds of that happening were slim. "Looks like I'll need to call for reinforcements," Nathan sighed. Now wasn't the time to let pride get in the way. Reluctantly, he picked up his phone and dialed the number of his longtime rival, Sophia. "Explore stories at my virtual library empire." Clearing his throat, he said, "Sophia, remember how Richard mentioned you'd be available to back me up?" "Oh, Mr. Nathan." Sophia's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd come crawling to me for help." Nathan grimaced but kept his tone neutral. He quickly explained the situation: the two massive zombie nests on the brink of war. Sophia, however, didn't seem particularly concerned. To her, battles between zombie factions were nothing new. "This kind of thing happens all the time," she said dismissively. "The solution is simple. Find an opportunity to assassinate the zombie kings. Then replace them with one of our own engineered zombie kings. Once that's done, we can take control of the situation. But these zombie kings aren't ordinary. You can't underestimate them," Nathan warned. "Ha, maybe you think every zombie king is extraordinary," Sophia shot back, taking the opportunity to mock him. "Don't worry. I'll send someone over soon." With that, the call ended. C-118 attack. The entire city of Los Angeles was simmering with tension, like a powder keg ready to explode. All the major factions had gathered, and the stage for an all-out war was set. By the riverbank, tens of thousands of zombies, the zombie horde, had assembled. Their grotesque faces were twisted in excitement, and their guttural roars echoed endlessly. The sheer scale of the horde was overwhelming, a terrifying and awe-inspiring sight. But amidst the sea of undead, a small group of humans stood on a massive boulder in the distance. These were Ethan's reinforcements. Mia, Sean, and a few builders, like Anna and Lillian, who were Ice Awakeners. Chris and Brandon had also joined the group. As they looked out at the endless swarm of zombies, their expressions betrayed a mix of awe and unease. Uncle Chris, there are so many zombies. Brandon exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. Chris squinted at the horde, his gaze steady. Of course. Almost every combat-capable zombie from 2 districts is here. Across the river, another massive wave of zombies was on the move, already swarming onto the bridge that spanned the water. They were clearly preparing to cross into enemy territory. Leading the charge was the Bone Claw Zombie King, acting as the vanguard. His steps were deliberate, his presence commanding, as he led tens of thousands of zombies to the bridgehead. On the far side of the bridge stood his adversaries: Bulldozer, Laura, PhD, and a host of elite zombies. The 2 zombie hordes faced off across the bridge, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. It felt like the entire battlefield was a powder keg, ready to ignite at the slightest spark. Bone Claw's eyes scanned the area, but Ethan was nowhere to be seen. The humiliation from the previous night still burned in his mind, fueling his rage. He was determined to kill Ethan at all costs. Attack! Bone Claw roared, his voice like a thunderclap. Without hesitation, he broke into a sprint, charging straight for the other side of the bridge. Roar! The zombies behind him erupted into a frenzy, as if his command had flipped a switch. They surged forward, their movements wild and frenzied. Some of the elite zombies even climbed onto the steel cables of the bridge, moving with the agility of apes as they raced toward the other side. The horde was like a tidal wave, surging forward with unstoppable momentum. Below, the river churned violently, while above, the zombie horde stormed the bridge. On the other side, Bulldozer remained unfazed. He turned to PhD and asked, "What level is that Bone Claw zombie leading the charge?" "A class," PhD replied matter-of-factly. Bulldozer snorted, his face twisting into a smirk. "That's it. Not even close to my level. All right then, let's do this." Bulldozer bellowed, his massive frame charging forward like a raging bull. Each step he took made the bridge tremble beneath him. Hey. Laura let out a sinister laugh, her figure flickering before vanishing into thin air. Behind them, the elite zombies roared in unison, their bloodlust reaching a fever pitch. The 2 zombie hordes collided in a chaotic clash. Enjoy exclusive chapters from my virtual library empire. Boom. Bulldozer and Bone Claw were the first to meet. Their bodies slammed into each other like 2 mountains colliding, the impact reverberating through the battlefield. Despite his wiry frame, Bone Claw stood his ground like a nail driven into the earth, unmoving. Bulldozer, on the other hand, was sent skidding back. Nearly 30 feet. What the hell? This guy's tough, Bulldozer muttered, his thick skin absorbing most of the impact. Undeterred, he raised his massive fists and charged again. Meanwhile, the rest of the zombies had also clashed. They tore into each other like rabid wolves, dragging their opponents to the ground, clawing and biting with reckless abandon. Limbs were ripped apart, and blackened blood sprayed into the air, painting the battlefield in gore. In some places, 7 or 8 zombies piled onto a single opponent, their ferocity unmatched. Laura, meanwhile, had turned into a one-woman slaughterhouse. Every time she reappeared, a zombie's head would go flying, or she'd disembowel another with surgical precision. The carnage she left in her wake was nothing short of horrifying. The bodies of fallen zombies tumbled off the bridge like raindrops, splashing into the river below. The water quickly turned dark with blood, attracting mutated fish that swarmed to feast on the corpses. Not far from the bridge, the Crimson Titan Zombie King stood watching the chaos unfold. His massive frame loomed over the battlefield as he observed the fight with a calm, calculating gaze. "Not bad," he muttered to himself. "The other side isn't as strong as I thought." "Yeah, we've got the numbers on our side," the pregnant Zombie King said with a sinister grin, her voice dripping with malice. But before anyone could respond, a deafening roar tore through the battlefield, a tiger's roar, so powerful it drowned out all the chaos around it. The sound was primal, commanding. It was the kind of roar that made the forest tremble and sent every creature scattering. Even the river below rippled violently, and the mutated fish feasting on corpses darted away in fear. A massive, majestic white tiger emerged from the shadows. With a single swipe of its paw, it smashed a zombie into pieces. Its jaws clamped down on another, crushing its skull like it was nothing. This was Snowy, the zombie tiger, and it tore through the battlefield like it was at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Wherever it went, zombies were obliterated, leaving a vacuum of destruction in its wake. What the? The Crimson Titan Zombie King furrowed his brow, his massive frame stiffening. Where the hell did this tiger come from? As if that wasn't enough, vines began snaking their way up the steel cables of the bridge. They moved like living serpents, wrapping around the necks of zombies and yanking them into the air. One by one, the undead were hoisted up like grotesque marionettes, dangling lifelessly. The entire bridge had turned into a macabre hanging ground. It was clear who was behind this. Sprout had joined the fight. This isn't right, Crimson Titan muttered, his frown deepening. First animals, now plants. What's next? The tide of battle was turning against Bone Claw and his forces. They were being pushed back, step by step, and it wouldn't be long before the enemy broke through to Crimson Titan's territory. Enough. Move in. Crimson Titan barked, his voice booming. At his command, 3 other zombie kings at his side leapt into the fray, joining the battle. The slaughter intensified. The bridge was now a blood-soaked battlefield, littered with corpses, severed limbs, and entrails. Blackened blood pooled and flowed like rivers, staining the water below a deep crimson. The air was thick with the stench of death. But Ethan's forces were clearly stronger. They tore through the enemy ranks like a storm, pushing forward relentlessly. By now, they had taken control of 2/3 of the bridge. Even Big Ears, one of Ethan's unofficial recruits, was in the mix. Though he didn't have much combat ability, as a B-class zombie king, he was still far stronger than the average elite zombie. He strutted around the battlefield like a self-proclaimed super soldier, clearly enjoying himself. Ha, I knew it. I've got an eye for talent. Big Ears laughed, watching the enemy crumble. Bulldozer, keep it up. You're doing great. But just as he was basking in his own glory, something strange happened. Bulldozer, who had been charging forward like an unstoppable force, suddenly froze in place. His massive frame stood motionless, like a mountain planted in the middle of the battlefield. Huh, Bulldozer. What's wrong? Did you fall asleep or something? Big Ears called out, walking up behind him. Meow tilde tilde tilde. The sound that came from Bulldozer's mouth wasn't human, or zombie. It was a chilling, unnatural cat's meow. Big Ears froze, his brow furrowing in confusion. A sense of unease crept over him. What the hell? Why are you meowing in the middle of a fight? Then he saw it. Bulldozer turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Big Ears. But his eyes weren't normal anymore. They had transformed into slitted, feline pupils, cold, predatory, and utterly alien. Holy crap! Big Ears gasped, his voice trembling. A chill ran down his spine. Before he could react, Bulldozer raised one of his massive fists, each the size of a boulder, and swung it straight at him. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What the hell, man? Big Ears yelped, scrambling backward just in time to avoid the blow. Bulldozer, stop, it's me. But Bulldozer didn't respond. His movements were erratic, his expression blank, as if he were possessed. Nearby, PhD had been observing the situation quietly. Ethan had warned him about this possibility beforehand, so he'd been keeping an eye on Bulldozer just in case. Now, it was time to act. PhD extended his hand, his mental energy surging outward. He cast Mind Spike, a psychic attack that pierced into Bulldozer's mind like a steel drill. Ruah-aarrr. Bulldozer howled in pain, clutching his head. The sound was eerily similar to a cat's wail, high-pitched and unsettling. His feline pupils flickered, then faded, returning to his usual dull, intelligent gaze. Huh, what just happened? Bulldozer asked, blinking in confusion. Nothing. Get back to fighting, PhD replied curtly. He didn't see the point in explaining. It wasn't like Bulldozer would understand anyway. Oh, okay, Bulldozer said, nodding blankly. Without another word, he turned and charged back into the fray. Big Ears, meanwhile, was still trembling, his face pale. He hadn't fully recovered from the shock of what had just happened. What the hell was that? He muttered to himself, his voice shaking. That scene just now was way too much for him. I can't deal with this. C-119 surprise troops. Damn it. At the far end of the bridge stood an old woman with a cat-like face. Her sharp teeth were clenched, and her eyes burned with hatred. No one expected the enemy to awaken psychic abilities. Zombies typically had weaker mental strength compared to humans, so it was incredibly rare for a zombie to develop psychic powers, something that could directly counter her. Meanwhile, at the center of the battlefield, the towering figure of the Crimson Titan stood out like a mountain. His skin was a reddish-brown hue, as hard and unyielding as stone. He was the embodiment of absolute defense. Even when elite zombies managed to bite him, their teeth shattered on impact. With a single swing of his massive arm, he could crush their skulls into dust. Wherever he passed, corpses piled up in heaps. His brutality was unmatched. But just as he was reveling in the carnage, a sudden, overwhelming pressure swept across the battlefield from the distance. It was like a tidal wave of blood crashing down, suffocating and inescapable. There was no doubt. A true king had entered the fray. Ethan, dressed in a pristine white shirt, walked calmly through the blood-soaked battlefield, his expression indifferent. He moved as if he were strolling through a quiet garden. Any zombie that dared approach him exploded into a mist of blood before they could even get close, their bodies disintegrating into nothingness. The real fight begins now, Crimson Titan muttered, his expression growing cautious. With a single thought, Ethan unleashed the terrifying domain of the dead, expanding it to its full range. The abandoned vehicles scattered across the battlefield began to hum and vibrate, twisting and contorting as if alive, before breaking apart into fragments. The scene before them was nothing short of apocalyptic. Crimson Titan's massive body was enveloped by the domain, and he immediately felt an immense weight pressing down on him, as if he were carrying a mountain. But with his A+ rank strength and his unparalleled physical endurance, he managed to remain standing, though his movements were noticeably slower. The same couldn't be said for the elite zombies around him. Their bones cracked and popped under the invisible pressure, as if being crushed by an enormous, unseen hand. Their faces twisted in agony. Roar. They let out pained howls before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. This guy's power is insane. We have to stop him. Crimson Titan, the zombie king, stared at Ethan with a mix of fear and determination. To him, Ethan was nothing less than a walking meat grinder, tearing through the battlefield with ease. Gritting his teeth, Crimson Titan pushed through the crushing pressure and leapt forward with surprising agility, throwing a powerful punch straight at Ethan. Ethan didn't even flinch. He raised his hand, and in an instant, Itachi appeared in his grasp. With a swift motion, he swung the blade. Clang! A sharp metallic screech echoed as the blade struck Crimson Titan's rock-like skin. Sparks flew, and even the blade itself chipped in several places. Is that all you've got? Crimson Titan smirked, realizing Ethan's weapon couldn't penetrate his defense. I see, Ethan murmured, almost to himself. Then, without hesitation, he extended his long, slender fingers, reaching directly for Crimson Titan's head. A sense of dread washed over Crimson Titan. His instincts screamed danger, and he quickly tilted his head to avoid the attack. Ethan's fingers grazed past his forehead, missing by mere inches. That was close, Crimson Titan thought, his heart pounding. Taking advantage of the moment, he swung another punch, aiming straight for Ethan's face. Die, he roared. But this time, Ethan had already dismissed his tachi. He clenched his hand into a fist and met Crimson Titan's punch head-on. Boom. The collision was like two stars colliding. The shockwave from their fists rippled outward, cracking the ground beneath them. The entire bridge trembled violently, sending several zombies tumbling into the river below. Crack. A sharp sound echoed as fractures spread across Crimson Titan's arm. His stone-like skin shattered in places, revealing deep fissures. The force of Ethan's punch sent him flying backward like a ragdoll. He crashed into several zombies along the way, killing them instantly, before rolling across the ground for over 10 meters. When he finally came to a stop, he looked utterly battered and humiliated. What the hell? Crimson Titan's mind reeled in shock. How is he this strong? It was the first time he had encountered a zombie with a physical body stronger than his own. Discover stories with my virtual library empire. Could it be? He's already reached S rank. High above the battlefield, Genesis Biotech's aircraft hovered silently, its cameras capturing every moment of the fight and broadcasting it live. Inside the control room, Nathan and a group of executives stared intently at the massive screen. This Crimson Titan zombie king is useless. Nathan slammed his hand on the table in frustration. At first, he had high hopes for Crimson Titan. Maybe, just maybe, he could push Ethan into a stalemate, or at least injure him. But now, he couldn't even withstand a single punch. Not only that, but Crimson Titan's zombie horde, despite their numbers, lacked the strength to make a difference. They were being slaughtered like cattle, completely outmatched. What Nathan had envisioned as an epic showdown between two titans had turned into a one-sided massacre. Useless. Absolutely useless. Nathan shouted furiously, slamming his fist on the table. It seemed the zombie king of the skyscraper district was far stronger. The real problem, though, was Nathan had already made plenty of enemies with him in the past. What if, after taking over Crimson Titan's territory, that zombie king led his horde straight to attack Nathan's company? Given the current situation, there was nothing he could do but wait for Sophia's reinforcements. Crimson Titan, covered in dust and debris, slowly got back to his feet. His regeneration ability was remarkable. His fractured arm was already healing at a visible rate. He turned his gaze forward and saw Ethan walking toward him, step by steady step, calm and unhurried as ever. "I'm done playing with you," Crimson Titan muttered. He had already decided to retreat. He'd come back to settle the score after breaking through to S rank. With that, he secretly issued a command. The elite zombies around him began retreating, their once dense formation scattering like a receding tide, quickly abandoning the bridge. Crimson Titan then raised his fist and slammed it into the ground. Boom! The sheer force of the blow cracked the bridge's surface, sending chunks of stone flying and creating deep fissures that spread outward. Even the bridge's support pillars began to show signs of strain. But one punch wasn't enough to bring the entire bridge down. He raised his fist again and struck. This time, the bridge's support pillars shattered completely. The bridge deck began to collapse, chunks of concrete and steel falling into the river below, creating massive splashes. Above, the steel cables groaned under the strain, vibrating violently before snapping one by one with a series of sharp, ping ping ping, sounds. Finally, the entire bridge gave way, collapsing in a cascade of rubble that stretched for hundreds of feet. Dust and debris filled the air, leaving a massive gap between the two sides. The two zombie factions were now completely separated, staring at each other across the chasm. Roar. Bulldozer, one of the other zombie kings, was visibly frustrated. He had been enjoying the fight, and just as the battle between the zombie kings was about to reach its peak, Crimson Titan had destroyed the bridge. "Coward. You spineless corpse. What a pathetic move," Bulldozer bellowed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "HMPH. Crimson Titan snorted dismissively, clearly unbothered by the insults. In this situation, only the opposing zombie king had the ability to cross the river. But without the terrifying zombie horde backing them up, even a few zombie kings crossing over would be walking straight into their deaths. This gave Crimson Titan a sense of confidence. "What's the matter? Don't like it? Then come over here if you dare," he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're pissing me off," Bulldozer roared, stomping his feet in frustration. His anger was palpable as he shouted and raged. But just as Crimson Titan was basking in his smugness, a sudden chill swept through the air. The temperature around them plummeted, and the surface of the river began to freeze over with a sharp, crack crack, sound as frost rapidly spread. "What the?" Crimson Titan's expression shifted to one of shock. He quickly turned toward the source of the cold and saw several human ice awakeners standing on the far side of the river, pouring their energy into their abilities. Under the relentless assault of their freezing powers, the river was sealed in ice within moments. A wide, solid ice bridge now stretched across the gap, connecting the two sides. Roar. A horde of zombies charged across the ice bridge, their movements swift and agile. These weren't ordinary zombies. They were Ethan's elite force of 500 warriors, his most trusted and deadly fighters. "The real battle begins now," Ethan said softly, his cold gaze fixed on Crimson Titan. Crimson Titan's eyes widened in disbelief. He never imagined that Ethan would ally with human awakeners. "That sneaky bastard. C-120 from now on, I'm in charge." The elite warriors charged forward like unleashed tigers, ferocious and unstoppable. In no time, they crossed the river, cutting through the opposing zombie horde like a razor-sharp blade. These warriors were practically indestructible. Rapid regeneration, unbreakable bones, they were walking weapons, each capable of taking on 10 enemies at once. "They're this strong." Crimson Titan's face darkened. He hadn't expected zombies with such advanced evolution. Watching his underlings get torn apart or devoured without even a chance to fight back made his stomach churn. And behind the 500 elite warriors, an endless wave of the zombie horde surged across the river, pouring into his territory. On a large boulder nearby, Mia leapt down with a sharp clang as she unsheathed her tachi, resting it casually on her shoulder. "Guess I'll join the fun." "Wait up. I'm coming too," Sean said, jogging after her. On the slick, icy surface of the river, he kept slipping every few steps, turning his crossing into an awkward but oddly playful slide to the other side. By now, the two zombie hordes had clashed in full force, and the battle had reached a fever pitch. The battlefield was utter chaos. Screams, roars, and the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart filled the air in a relentless cacophony. The scene before them was like something straight out of hell. At the heart of the carnage, the cat-faced old woman stood drenched in blood, her grotesque half-human, half-cat face twisted in fury. Even as the zombie queen, she was struggling to hold her ground, surrounded by the elite warriors. Their relentless assault was pushing her to her limits. Then, with a piercing screech that shook the battlefield, she unleashed her possession ability to its fullest extent. The elite warriors around her froze in place, their pupils contracting and shifting into eerie, feline slits. Now that's what I'm talking about. Crimson Titan exclaimed, genuinely impressed. These elite zombies had been a massive headache for him, nearly impossible to deal with unless you were a zombie king yourself. But the cat-faced old woman's ability. It was the perfect counter. And now, those elite warriors were hers to command. Lucky for him, his subordinates had some pretty freaky powers. But what no one noticed was the shadow creeping behind the cat-faced old woman. It writhed and twisted like a living void, slowly rising and taking on a humanoid form. Kahahehehe. Surprise. With a sickening crack, Little Shadow's shadow-formed claw plunged straight into the cat-faced old woman's back. The sound of tearing flesh was followed by a spray of foul black blood. Her eyes widened in shock, the cold grip of death closing in on her. The elite warriors she had just possessed blinked, their cat-like pupils fading. Their original savage expressions returned as they all turned their gaze toward her. Roar. With a collective, guttural snarl, 6 of the elite warriors pounced on her, dragging her to the ground. Claws and teeth tore into her flesh as they ripped her apart. Aarrghhhhh. The cat-faced old woman's screams echoed across the battlefield, but they were soon drowned out as the zombie horde swarmed over her, burying her completely. She's done for. Crimson Titan's brow furrowed deeply. He had just praised her, and now she was gone, taken out by a sneak attack. Things weren't looking good. The elite warriors had barely crossed the river and already taken out one of his key players. And now, Ethan had appeared on the far side of the bridge. Wherever his domain of the dead extended, zombies exploded into pieces, unable to withstand his overwhelming power. With every step he took, more zombies fell, as if death itself was advancing across the battlefield. Around him, Laura, Bulldozer, PhD, and the other zombie kings were in a frenzy, tearing through the enemy ranks. Black blood sprayed in all directions, and severed limbs littered the ground. Amid this apocalyptic clash of the undead, there was something unusual, human presence. Crimson Titan turned his head and spotted Mia. She was cutting through his forces with her tachi, the blade crackling with lightning. Wherever it struck, black blood and chunks of flesh flew, as if she had turned into a one-woman zombie blender. You've got to be kidding me. A human. Here. Crimson Titan's fury boiled over. This was supposed to be a battle between zombie kings, and now humans were interfering. And worse, if it weren't for them, the enemy wouldn't have even made it across the river. You. Go kill her. I don't care what it takes. Crimson Titan barked at the pregnant zombie king, his voice dripping with rage. Yes. The pregnant zombie king's figure blurred as it darted toward Mia. Meanwhile, Crimson Titan's gaze locked onto Ethan. The enemy had invaded his territory, there was no turning back now. With a roar, he charged at Ethan, his massive frame barreling forward like a runaway freight train. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he closed the distance, his momentum unstoppable. Ethan glanced over, his expression indifferent, as if Crimson Titan wasn't even worth his attention. His domain of the dead expanded outward, the crushing pressure so immense that the ground beneath them cracked and splintered, enveloping Crimson Titan entirely. This damn oppressive force. Crimson Titan's speed slowed dramatically. He had planned to rush in and land a solid punch, but before he could even react, Ethan's figure blurred and appeared right in front of him. Ethan's fist was already raised, ready to strike. Crimson Titan had no choice but to switch to defense, crossing his massive arms in front of him to block. Bam! The impact sounded like a meteor slamming into the earth. The sheer force of Ethan's punch was unstoppable, a raw explosion of power. Crimson Titan felt his arms go numb as his entire body was launched backward like a baseball hit out of the park. He tumbled through the air, rolling several times before crashing to the ground. Looking down at his arms, he saw deep cracks running along them, with foul black blood oozing out in thick rivulets. Thankfully, his regeneration ability kicked in, and the wounds began to heal. But it was slower than usual. Much slower. Crimson Titan clenched his jaw. He knew it. If this kept up, he wouldn't last much longer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Mia was cutting through zombies like a whirlwind, her tachi slicing with precision and speed. But out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of a terrifying figure barreling toward her. The pregnant zombie king lunged, claws extended, aiming straight for her. The sound of the air being torn apart reached her ears, a sharp whistle of danger. Mia's cold gaze flicked toward the incoming attack, and she swiftly raised her blade to block. Clang! The Tachi let out a deafening metallic screech, the force of the impact so intense it felt like it could shatter eardrums. Mia's grip faltered slightly, the webbing between her thumb and forefinger splitting open as blood seeped out. Pain level 13%. A mere piece of food dares to invade our territory. You're asking for death. The pregnant zombie king screeched, its voice shrill and unhinged. The sight of blood seemed to drive it into an even greater frenzy. Mia didn't respond. Her expression remained calm, almost detached, as she raised her blade again. The lightning crystal core embedded in her weapon flared to life, crackling with electricity. Her movements became a blur, her strikes so fast they left afterimages in the air. But the pregnant zombie king wasn't weak either. Its reflexes were sharp, its claws slashing and parrying with precision. Sparks flew as their attacks collided, the battlefield around them lighting up with flashes of electricity and the sound of metal meeting bone. The fight was brutal, but Mia's humanity worked against her. The scent of her blood was like a dinner bell for the surrounding zombies. More and more of them began to converge on her position, including several elite ones. She had to split her focus, swinging her blade to cut down the zombies closing in on her. But that momentary distraction was all the pregnant zombie king needed. Its claws shot forward with terrifying speed. Shunk. The sound of flesh being pierced was sickening. The pregnant zombie king's elongated claws drove into Mia's shoulder, nearly skewering her slender frame completely. Even then, Mia's expression didn't waver. Without hesitation, she raised her leg and delivered a brutal kick to the pregnant zombie king's bloated stomach. The force of the blow sent it flying 50 feet away, crashing into the ground with a heavy thud. The two of them were temporarily separated. Blood poured from Mia's shoulder, soaking her clothes until they turned a deep, dark red. The wound bloomed like a grotesque flower, vivid and raw. The scent of her blood was intoxicating to the surrounding zombies. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, their snarls growing louder as they closed in like a pack of starving wolves. Within moments, Mia was surrounded. Dozens, then hundreds of zombies pressed in, their grotesque faces twisted with bloodlust. They formed a suffocating wall around her, layer upon layer of snapping jaws and clawing hands. Mia scanned the horde, her gaze calm but calculating. She hadn't expected this many zombies to show up. Originally, she'd thought she could just hang back and play a supporting role. This wasn't her battlefield, after all. But now, seriously, ganging up on the quiet one. That's just low. Mia gripped the hilt of her blade tightly as sparks of electricity began to dance along its surface, gradually enveloping the entire blade. Her aura surged, growing more intense with every passing second. Pain level 35%. In a flash, her body moved, so fast it seemed to blur, like a streak of lightning darting across the battlefield, faster than the human eye could follow. With a series of swift slashes from her tachi, several zombie heads were sent flying. But she didn't stop. Her momentum carried her straight toward the pregnant zombie king. In the blink of an eye, she was already in front of it. This human. The pregnant zombie king's heart filled with dread. The sound of rushing wind reached its ears as Mia's blade swept toward it in a deadly arc, poised to strike its throat in the next instant. Panicking, the pregnant zombie king scrambled backward, trying to evade the attack. But the tachi was too fast. It was a step too late. Shhhk. The razor-sharp blade sliced through its chest, tearing flesh and leaving a deep, gaping wound. Foul, black blood gushed out in a spray. Though the injury wasn't fatal, it enraged the pregnant zombie king, awakening its primal fury. Its expression twisted into something dark and malevolent. From its swollen, round belly, the outline of a baby began to shift and writhe beneath the skin, becoming more distinct with each passing moment. The movement grew more violent. You've disturbed my baby, human, it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. What? Mia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the grotesque sight. And then, wah! A piercing cry rang out, sharp and shrill, cutting through the chaos of the battlefield. Even amidst the clamor of combat, the sound was jarring, impossible to ignore. The other zombie kings, locked in their own battles, turned their heads toward the source of the cry. Ethan glanced over, his senses immediately picking up on a sinister, oppressive energy growing stronger by the second. Something dark and malevolent was about to emerge. Even the Crimson Titan zombie king looked startled. In its memory, the pregnant zombie king had always fed its child with flesh and blood, but it had never heard the baby cry before. And then it saw why. The pregnant zombie king's entire body tensed, veins bulging grotesquely beneath its skin. Its already horrifying face contorted into something even more monstrous. Crack KKK. Its swollen belly split open, the skin tearing apart to reveal a baby's face. The infant's skin was ashen gray, its sharp fangs glinting under the dim light. Its eyes were pure black, devoid of whites, like twin voids staring into nothingness. The baby's small body was shrouded in a thick, black mist that radiated an aura of pure malice. It was a sight so horrifying it sent chills down the spine of anyone who saw it. Go, my little one, the pregnant zombie king said in a chilling, sing-song tone. Your next journey awaits at my virtual library empire. The baby crawled out of its mother's ruptured belly, moving on all fours in a disturbingly unnatural way. It scuttled toward Mia with terrifying speed. The sight alone was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. Ha 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 ha. The baby let out a sinister giggle as the black mist around it began to spread. Despite its small size, it exuded an overwhelming sense of dread. Though it had just been born, the baby had already awakened its powers, thanks to the pregnant zombie king's long-term feeding. The black mist enveloped Mia, and she immediately felt her body stiffen, as if paralyzed. Her limbs refused to respond, and a numbing sensation spread through her muscles. The zombie fetus suddenly leapt at her, its tiny body moving with unnatural agility. It landed on her, its sharp fangs bared as it lunged for her slender neck. Crunch. Its teeth sank into her flesh, and blood sprayed out in a crimson arc. Mia tilted her head slightly at the last second, narrowly avoiding a fatal bite. If she hadn't moved, half her neck would have been torn apart. The pregnant zombie king, seeing an opportunity, charged forward. Its sharp claws extended, aiming straight for Mia's heart, intent on finishing her off. But the searing pain coursing through Mia's body only seemed to fuel her. Her cells were firing on all cylinders, her survival instincts kicking in. She raised her arm to block the attack. Shhhk. The claws pierced through her forearm, leaving a deep, bone-deep wound. Pain level 53%. From a distance, Ethan watched the scene unfold, his eyes narrowing. A thought crossed his mind. Is she seriously going to get herself killed? Meanwhile, the pregnant zombie king's glowing, blood-red eyes locked onto Mia. A sense of unease crept into its mind. How is this human still moving? She's under my baby's paralysis. But before it could finish the thought, a steel fist came out of nowhere, slamming into its face with brutal force. The impact sent it flying nearly 60 feet through the air. Sean appeared where the pregnant zombie king had stood moments before. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned Mia's bloodied form, taking in the exposed wounds and the blood dripping from her body. A flicker of concern crossed his face. It was the first time he'd ever seen her this badly injured. Are you okay? Sean asked, his voice tinged with concern. Feels just right, Mia replied, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her blood-stained lips. With a swift motion, she flung the zombie fetus off her shoulder, sending it flying through the air. The intense pain coursing through her body had pushed her past her limits. Nothing could hold her back now. Her cells were surging with energy, and her wounds were already beginning to heal at an unnatural speed. Oh, well, that's good then, Sean muttered, nodding dumbly, still processing what he was seeing. Meanwhile, the pregnant zombie king stood frozen, utterly dumbfounded. The scene before her shattered everything she thought she knew. Is this really a human? She muttered in disbelief. Mia's gaze sharpened, and in an instant, she moved again, this time even faster. Her speed was so blinding that it seemed as though she had vanished into thin air. Her blade, crackling with lightning, became a streak of light. The pregnant zombie king barely had time to register the sudden gust of wind rushing toward her before her world spun violently. In the fleeting moment before her consciousness faded, she saw her own headless body collapsing to the ground. As Mia passed by, her blade had already severed the pregnant zombie king's head in one clean, decisive strike. The Crimson Titan zombie king stood in stunned silence, his expression blank. One of his most powerful allies had just been killed. By a human, no less, and in such a brutal, effortless manner. Even he, a self-proclaimed monster, found the scene horrifying. His brief skirmish with Ethan had left him heavily injured. His regenerative abilities were slowing, and his energy reserves were nearly depleted. Now, with two zombie kings already dead, the Crimson Titan felt the tide of battle turning against him. Victory was slipping further and further away. On the other side, both the humans and the remaining zombie kings were still fighting fiercely, their strength undiminished. The Crimson Titan couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. For the first time, he wondered if even he could stand against Mia. Earlier, he had managed to hold Ethan at bay only because of the sheer numbers of his zombie horde acting as cannon fodder. But now, his once mighty army of 40,000 zombies had been reduced to half. Meanwhile, the enemy forces, both human and zombie, remained strong, their elite fighters cutting through his ranks like a hot knife through butter. If this continued, defeat was inevitable. I need to retreat, the Crimson Titan thought grimly. Forget the territory. I can always rebuild in another city. Staying here will only get me killed. He glanced at the remaining 20,000 zombies under his command. They would be enough to buy him some time to escape. If he waited too long, he wouldn't even have the chance to run. With that, the Crimson Titan began to retreat, slipping toward the rear of his forces. But his movements didn't go unnoticed. Hey, where are you going? The Bone Claw Zombie King growled, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted the Crimson Titan's retreat. Bone Claw, now's the time to run. If we don't leave now, we'll never get the chance. The Crimson Titan called back. Run. Bone Claw's bloodshot eyes widened. His body was covered in wounds, his flesh torn and mangled from the relentless battle. He had been pushed to the brink of madness, barely surviving the onslaught from Laura and Bulldozer. If not for his bone wings granting him the ability to fly, he would have already ended up like the cat-faced Zombie King and the pregnant Zombie King, dead. Fine, I'll go with you. Bone Claw snarled, flying over to join the Crimson Titan. Good, the Crimson Titan said with a nod. Having an ally by his side would make it easier to rebuild his forces later. But just as he began to strategize his escape, a sudden chill ran down his spine. He felt something cold pierce the back of his head. SHHHK. A bone claw had stabbed into the back of his skull, its sharp tips gripping his crystal core. Bone Claw. You, the Crimson Titan's eyes widened in shock as he realized what was happening. His mind reeled with disbelief and horror. Bone Claw's face twisted into a deranged grin. You're trying to run away in the middle of a battle. How can someone like you lead us? Why don't you hand over your crystal core to me? I'll finish off the enemy myself. Before the Crimson Titan could respond, Bone Claw's clawed hand yanked back, ripping the crystal core from his skull. Black blood sprayed everywhere, mixing with the red and white of his exposed brain matter. The Crimson Titan's massive body collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash, lifeless. The surrounding elite zombies turned to stare, stunned by what had just happened. None of them could comprehend why their leader had been killed by one of their own. But Bone Claw's crazed expression only grew more unhinged. His bloodied face twisted into a manic grin as he held up the crystal core for all to see. The Crimson Titan tried to flee like a coward, so I killed him. Bone Claw roared. From now on, I'm in charge. Follow my orders, kill them all. The battlefield erupted into chaos once more. C-121 in the end. I still lost. Infighting already. Ethan's gaze sharpened as he stared ahead. The Bone Claw Zombie King stood in the distance, clutching a blood-soaked crystal core in his hand. Without hesitation, he shoved it into his mouth, swallowing it whole like a ravenous beast. His body began to tremble as he absorbed the energy, his expression growing maniacally ecstatic. Ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. A crazed laugh erupted from his mouth as his entire skeleton began to crack and pop audibly. His body swelled grotesquely, his skin splitting apart to reveal gleaming white bones beneath. But the truly horrifying part was what came next. Those exposed bones started to writhe and shift, reshaping themselves into armor. His chest, arms, thighs, and finally his head were encased in a skeletal exoskeleton, forming a terrifying suit of bone armor. At the same time, his aura surged wildly, radiating an oppressive force that made the air feel heavy. A crimson mist of blood energy swirled around him, giving him the appearance of a war god forged from bone and blood. The Bone Claw Zombie King's unique ability was skeletal mutation, and now, after consuming an A+ grade crystal core, he had fully evolved into his ultimate form. His transformation was complete. The power emanating from him now far surpassed that of the Crimson Titan from before. Damn, that's insane. Even Bulldozer, who rarely showed emotion, couldn't help but mutter in awe. He glanced at the grotesque transformation and quipped, "That's one hell of a case of bone overgrowth." PhD, observing through his scanner, frowned deeply. S rank. What? The surrounding zombie kings were visibly shocked. None of them had expected his power to skyrocket so quickly. PhD explained, he didn't just absorb the crystal core. He already had a latent transformation ability, and now he's finally unleashed it. Ah, I see. The other zombie kings nodded in understanding, though unease flickered in their eyes. S rank. That puts him on par with the boss. It seemed they had a real contender on their hands. Meanwhile, back at Genesis Biotech, Nathan, who had been slumped in despair moments ago, suddenly perked up. His eyes locked onto the massive screen in front of him, where the Bone Claw Zombie King stood, surrounded by swirling blood energy. Every movement he made radiated raw, terrifying power. A glimmer of hope sparked in Nathan's heart. He had been convinced that their side was doomed, crushed under Ethan's overwhelming strength. But now it seemed like there was still a chance. So you're the real final boss, huh? Nathan thought to himself, a mix of awe and relief washing over him. The executives around him couldn't help but murmur amongst themselves. A zombie king with this level of power is practically unheard of, even in the major cities. We seriously underestimated them. This is perfect. Let the zombie kings tear each other apart. The more they weaken each other, the better for us. Ideally, they'll both destroy each other. Their hushed voices carried a mix of fear and cold calculation as they watched the unfolding chaos. The Bone Claw Zombie King's overwhelming aura seemed to invigorate the surrounding zombies. Their morale, which had been faltering, surged back to life. They became even more ferocious, their blood-stained faces twisted into terrifying snarls. Their mouths, filled with jagged teeth, let out guttural roars as they charged forward with renewed frenzy. Ethan, standing amidst the chaos, remained calm and unshaken. His expression was as composed as ever, his voice carrying a faint trace of amusement as he muttered, "Sacrificing your own allies to boost your power, truly limitless potential." The zombies around the Bone Claw Zombie King went berserk, launching themselves at Ethan's forces with reckless abandon. They tore into their enemies with savage determination, biting and clawing even as their own bodies were torn apart. Some continued to attack even after their heads were ripped off, their jaws snapping mindlessly. The Bone Claw Zombie King's gaze, however, was fixed solely on Ethan. His eyes burned with hatred, his mind consumed by memories of the humiliation and scorn he had endured the night before. The fury within him had reached its boiling point. "Let's see how you handle this," he roared, his confidence surging as he reveled in his newfound power. His figure blurred as he moved, his speed now so great that he seemed to vanish, leaving only a faint afterimage as he charged straight at Ethan. Ethan didn't move. He stood perfectly still, not even bothering to activate his domain of the dead. Slowly, he raised his hand, his long fingers curling into a fist. With a calm, deliberate motion, he threw a punch. Boom. The Bone Claw Zombie King didn't hesitate, meeting Ethan's punch head-on. The collision of their fists unleashed a cataclysmic shockwave, like a volcanic eruption. The sheer force of the impact sent a powerful blast of air rippling outward, knocking nearby zombies off their feet and hurling them through the air. The ground beneath the two combatants cracked and crumbled, deep fissures spreading outward as the earth gave way under the immense pressure. The scene was one of utter devastation. But then, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the chaos. The bone armor on the Bone Claw Zombie King's arm splintered, fine cracks spider webbing across its surface. A moment later, his massive body was sent hurtling backward, flying hundreds of feet through the air. He smashed through two crumbling buildings before finally coming to a stop, buried in the rubble. Even Bulldozer and the other zombie kings, who had seen countless battles, were stunned by the sheer intensity of the fight. For the first time, they found themselves at a loss for words. "Hey, the boss is still the strongest," one of them finally exclaimed, breaking the silence. "I thought the other guy was supposed to be tough, but turns out he's nothing special. The boss is invincible." Quote. Laura, tilting her head slightly, frowned in confusion. "But wait. Isn't Bone Claw also S rank? Shouldn't he be on the same level as the boss? Why is the gap still so huge?" PhD, who had been quietly observing, furrowed his brow in thought. After a moment, he removed his scanner and examined it closely. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind. "I've figured it out. His limit is just S rank." Huh. The others turned to him, bewildered. As the dust began to settle, the Bone Claw Zombie King lay sprawled in the rubble, his jagged teeth clenched tightly in frustration. His mind was a storm of anger and disbelief. How could this happen? Lifting his gaze, he saw Ethan approaching. The man's expression was as calm as ever, his pristine white shirt completely unblemished, as if the battle hadn't even touched him. Ethan's piercing gaze locked onto the Bone Claw Zombie King as he spoke in a measured tone. "You've gotten a little stronger than before, I'll give you that. But just a little. That familiar, Suffocating sense of humiliation surged through the Bone Claw Zombie King once more. He couldn't accept it. He refused to accept it. Die, he roared, blood energy flaring around him as he launched himself out of the rubble. Like a moth to a flame, he charged at Ethan, his fist raised for another desperate attack. But Ethan's figure blurred, shifting sideways with an almost unnatural grace. The Bone Claw Zombie King's punch struck nothing but air. Before he could recover, Ethan spun around and delivered a swift kick to his back. The strike seemed effortless, but the force behind it was devastating. The bone armor on the Zombie King's back shattered as he was sent hurtling through the air. Before he could even hit the ground, Ethan appeared above him in a flash. With a single, brutal motion, Ethan brought his foot down. Stay connected with my virtual library empire. Boom. The Bone Claw Zombie King was slammed into the ground with such force that the earth caved in, forming a massive crater. Dust and debris exploded outward as the ground trembled violently. Ethan stood over him, one foot planted firmly on the Zombie King's chest. His expression remained cold and detached as he looked down at his opponent. Without hesitation, he raised his foot again and brought it down on the Bone Claw Zombie King's head. The ground quaked with each stomp, the crater widening with every blow. The Bone Claw Zombie King's once impenetrable bone armor was now shattered and crumbling. The blood energy that had once surrounded him had completely dissipated, his reserves of power utterly drained. His body could no longer heal itself. Ethan finally stopped, his gaze sweeping over the broken figure beneath him. That should do it, he muttered, stepping back. Meanwhile, inspired by Ethan's dominance, Bulldozer and the other zombie kings fought with renewed ferocity. Leading their elite force of 500 warriors, they tore through the enemy ranks, leaving nothing but carnage in their wake. The opposing forces were completely overwhelmed. As the battle wound down, the zombie kings began to regroup, making their way toward Ethan. The Bone Claw Zombie King, lying in the center of the crater, clung to the last shreds of his consciousness. His vision blurred as he saw the faces of the other zombie kings, Laura, Bulldozer, Sprout, Little Shadow, all staring down at him with cold indifference. His remaining thoughts began to fade, his mind slipping into darkness. In the end, I still lost. And with that, his world went black. C-122 What a precious little child. At Genesis Biotech, Nathan stood frozen, staring blankly at the scene before him. That's it. He had expected the Bone Claw Zombie King to rise again, but instead, it was crushed in an instant, brutally stomped to death by Ethan. The sight was downright gruesome. Isn't his awakened ability supposed to be absolute domain? How is his physical strength this insane? This revelation completely upended Nathan's understanding of things. He had hoped, at the very least, to use this fight to uncover some kind of weakness in Ethan. But now, it seemed, he didn't have any. This zombie king was way stronger than I imagined. Even if Sophia's people showed up, they'd just be walking to their deaths. Nathan thought to himself. But he knew Sophia. She was arrogant as hell and wouldn't believe a word he said. If he tried to warn her about this, she'd probably just use it as an excuse to humiliate him. He needed a plan. One of the senior executives standing beside him was equally shaken. Mr. Nathan, what are we supposed to do now? Start packing. By the river, the golden sunlight spilled over the water, making the surface shimmer. But unlike before, the river now glowed a deep crimson, stained by the blood of the fallen. Corpses and severed limbs floated downstream, attracting swarms of mutated fish that chased and tore into the remains. Even the riverbanks were piled high with bodies, blackened blood pooling and flowing everywhere. The entire scene was a wasteland of carnage. Rarg! Bulldozer and the other zombies roared in excitement, their voices echoing as they celebrated their victory over a major rival. Big Ears, among them, was especially smug. We're unstoppable. What does this have to do with you? Laura shot him a sideways glance, her tone dripping with disdain. Clearly, she still wasn't fond of him. Ethan, meanwhile, had already pocketed the crystal core of the Bone Claw Zombie King. He didn't feel much about the victory, it was just another fight to him. Nothing special. The whole reason for the battle had been simple. He wanted peace of mind. He didn't want to be disturbed, so he'd wiped out the Bone Claw Zombie King and its crew. Now that the fight was over, Los Angeles and the surrounding areas were free of any zombie nests that could challenge him. Sure, there were still a few small factions scattered around, but none of them would dare to make a move. It's done. Let's head out, Mia said as she approached with a few of her helpers in tow. The injuries she'd sustained during the fight had already healed, most of them scabbed over. The bite marks on her neck, however, were still particularly gruesome. Even though she'd been bitten by the zombie fetus, her powerful physique allowed her to purge the zombie virus on her own. She wouldn't turn unless the virus exceeded her body's limits. Good work, Ethan said, offering her a rare word of comfort. Mia had played a big role in the fight, helping him take down the pregnant zombie king. Wait, speaking of the pregnant zombie king, Ethan suddenly remembered something. What happened to the zombie fetus it gave birth to? I have no idea. Mia thought back for a moment but couldn't recall. I think I just flung it away during the fight. No clue if it's dead or alive. It disappeared after that. All right, Ethan said with a nod, deciding not to dwell on it. It didn't seem important. With that, everyone went their separate ways. After defeating the Bone Claw and Cat-faced zombie kings, Ethan's territory expanded once again. His zombie horde now numbered over 40,000, with nearly 8,000 elite zombies among them, and the numbers were still growing. The bridge over the river had been destroyed during the battle. The broken section was now connected by Sprout's vines, leaving half the bridge covered in plants. It looked like something straight out of a post-apocalyptic war zone. From now on, Sprout would guard the bridge. With the river below and mountains on the sides, it was a prime spot for mutated beasts or other strange creatures to show up. As for the new territory, Ethan couldn't be bothered to inspect it himself. He left it entirely in the hands of his underlings. Big Ears, in particular, was eager to take charge. He pressed his oversized ears to the ground as he moved forward, scanning for potential threats like a living vacuum cleaner, sweeping the area clean. But what no one knew. Floating in the river, carried along by the current, was a baby. Your next chapter is on my virtual library empire. Wah! Wah! The baby's cries echoed loudly, filled with despair and grief. Black mist swirled around him, thick and ominous. His sorrow was overwhelming. His mother, the one who had been feeding him, had been killed by humans. The face of the human who did it was burned into his memory, etched so deeply that a seed of hatred had already begun to take root and grow. The baby's scent and cries quickly attracted mutated fish from the river. But as soon as they got close, the black mist surrounding him would freeze them in place, dragging them straight to the riverbed. The fish couldn't harm him. The baby drifted downstream, carried by the current. The river gradually calmed, and he eventually floated into an artificial drainage canal that led to the flooded ruins of Santa Monica. Along the way, he passed toppled skyscrapers and desolate wreckage, the remnants of a world long gone. Finally, he ended up in a pile of floating corpses. Around him, the sounds of flesh being torn and devoured echoed in the air. The water beneath him had turned into a literal pool of blood. Suddenly, a glowing blue claw emerged from the water. It ignored the black mist entirely and grabbed the baby, pulling him out of the river. The zombie fetus immediately stopped crying. His pitch-black eyes opened wide, reflecting the grotesque head of a monstrous creature. What a precious little child. A raspy voice, like the sound of rust scraping against metal, whispered in his ear. ... Meanwhile, Ethan had returned to his clean and orderly home. After taking a shower and changing into fresh clothes, he pulled out the crystal core of the Bone Claw Zombie King and popped it into his mouth. The core was high grade, packed with dense energy. It melted instantly on his tongue, its flavor surprisingly sweet, like a perfectly ripe mandarin orange. Ethan could feel the pure energy nourishing his body, fueling his ongoing evolution. Since taking down the Bone Claw Zombie King and the others, the world outside his window had grown quieter. The constant howls and roars of zombies had faded, leaving the area around his building eerily peaceful. If he closed his eyes, he could almost imagine it was the world before the apocalypse. Life without enemies is so relaxing, Ethan leaned back on the couch, savoring the rare moment of tranquility. While Ethan enjoyed his peace, his underlings were hard at work, busy taking over the newly claimed territory. Their first task was to patrol the area and ensure there were no hidden dangers. Big Ears, as usual, was the most diligent. He pressed his oversized ears to the ground, tirelessly scanning for threats. The area across the river was relatively isolated, bordered by the San Gabriel Mountains on one side and the river on the other. To the east lay San Bernardino, a neighboring region. The mountains, however, were far from safe. They were teeming with mutated beasts, plants, and even humans hiding in the wilderness. Closer to the San Gabriel Mountains was a vast cemetery, a burial ground where the city's dead had been laid to rest before the apocalypse. For years, the cemetery had been shrouded in eerie legends, stories of strange and terrifying phenomena. No one knew if the abundance of zombie kings in the area was somehow connected to that cursed land. At that moment, Big Ear's ears twitched. He suddenly lifted his head and looked toward the sky. Far in the distance, at the edge of the horizon, he spotted a small shadow flying over the mountains from the other side. Bulldozer. I've found something. C-123 Queen Laura. Bulldozer squinted his small eyes, staring at the tiny shadow in the sky. It turned out to be a helicopter, slowly moving across the horizon. Before long, it disappeared into the clouds. I've seen that thing before. It's probably one of Genesis Biotech's aircraft. Oh. Big Ears nodded, silently marveling at how well informed Bulldozer was. At the same time, he couldn't help but think to himself, looks like Genesis Biotech is up to something. Probably nothing good. Right now, the boss is the undisputed king of Los Angeles. When's he gonna take Genesis Biotech down? Big Ears was confident Ethan had the strength to do it. Bulldozer scratched his head and said, Genesis Biotech's been sending the boss plenty of stuff. If we take them out, who's gonna keep delivering the goods? Big Ears was momentarily speechless. It actually made sense. Kind of like keeping them around as livestock. But to treat Genesis Biotech like livestock, only Ethan could pull something like that off. As the two zombies chatted, they reached the edge of their territory. Up ahead was a hill, and on its slope lay a graveyard. From a distance, rows of tombstones stood tall, stretching back into a dense forest. The cemetery was eerily quiet, with a sinister atmosphere that gave off an unsettling vibe. Bulldozer glanced at it with his small eyes and immediately decided it wasn't a good place. You handle the search over there. I'm heading back. Big Ears opened his mouth, realizing the worst job had been dumped on the non-essential personnel. But he didn't dare complain. He pressed his ear to the ground and trudged forward alone to patrol the area. Meanwhile, at Genesis Biotech, a helicopter roared as it slowly landed on the helipad. The violent gusts of wind whipped Nathan's hair as he stood with a group of executives, waiting nearby. 5 figures stepped out of the helicopter, all clad in sleek, high-tech nano-combat suits. They carried advanced equipment and exuded a powerful, intimidating presence. Leading the group was a tall woman with a striking figure. Her short, ear-length hair gave her a sharp, no-nonsense look, and her piercing eyes radiated a sense of aloofness. Her name was Jessica Reed, an A-class awakener sent by Sophia to assist. Nathan quickly stepped forward to greet her. Captain Reed, hello, Mr. Nathan, let's cut to the chase. Tell me what's going on, and let's wrap this up quickly. We're busy, and don't plan to stay in Los Angeles any longer than necessary, Jessica said coldly. Nathan's enthusiastic smile froze. It felt like he'd just been slapped in the face. Why is she as stuck up as Sophia? What's there to be so proud of? Are they in a rush to die or something? All right, Captain Reed, follow me. Nathan led them to a conference room, where he began a presentation using slides to explain Ethan's rise to power. He detailed everything, from Ethan's early days in prison, to his takeover of the mall, to the major battles that followed. Every event was meticulously documented. One slide even featured a photo of Ethan standing on a rooftop, surrounded by crows, wearing a crisp white shirt. A white shirt? This zombie king has quite the flair, Jessica remarked, her sharp eyes fixed on the image. A male team member beside her chuckled. Well, he's a zombie, not a human. Having a few quirks is normal. Jessica nodded. Her squad had encountered zombie kings before, and they came in all sorts of bizarre forms. Nothing surprised her anymore. Nathan, still animated, continued, this zombie king isn't just powerful, he's practically invincible. His body is insanely tough, and he has no apparent weaknesses. Really? Jessica raised an eyebrow. I've never seen a zombie evolve to such perfection. Not only that, Nathan added, after several battles, his zombie horde has grown to over 40,000. His tone was exaggerated, as if trying to emphasize the gravity of the situation. Jessica's squad, however, didn't seem particularly impressed. One of the male team members smirked. Sounds like Mr. Nathan hasn't seen much. We've dealt with hordes of nearly 100,000 before. And in the end, we still took down their zombie king. Sure, 40,000 isn't a lot, Nathan admitted, but here's the thing. Nearly 10,000 of them are elite zombies. What? The male team member fell silent. That was something he hadn't encountered before. And, Nathan hesitated, his voice growing quieter. Some of them have been injected with the X virus and Y virus. Jessica. The room fell into an awkward silence. Nathan cleared his throat and said, honestly, I've been thinking, even with you here, I'm not sure you can beat him. So, please, be careful. Don't worry. We have our own strategies, Jessica said, her eyes narrowing. When it comes to a zombie king like this, the best approach is assassination. With so many elite zombies under his command, storming his lair head-on was out of the question. That kind of brute force wasn't feasible. The best option was to wait for the right moment, catch him outside his territory, or near its edges, and take him out swiftly and decisively. Read the latest on my virtual library empire. On the other side, Big Ears was still dutifully patrolling the territory. He had wandered into the graveyard, where the surroundings were eerily quiet. The only sounds were the faint howling of the wind and the occasional rustling of leaves in the distance. Looks like there's nothing here, Big Ears muttered to himself. He didn't want to linger in this place. It felt creepy, and an unsettling sense of unease gnawed at him. Just as he was about to turn and leave, something caught the corner of his eye. Among the rows of tombstones, a figure appeared. Who's there? Big Ears froze, a shiver running down his spine. He quickly turned to look. Standing not far away was a female zombie. She was thin, with long, razor-sharp nails that gleamed like steel blades. Big Ears recognized her immediately. It was Laura. Queen Laura. Big Ears' eyes widened in shock. His expression was a mix of surprise and dread. Something felt off. Why was she suddenly here? Laura stood, motionless, her face blank and expressionless. Her eyes weren't filled with the usual ferocity but instead carried a chilling aura of death. You. Come here, Laura said slowly, her voice cold and emotionless. Big Ears instinctively shook his head, backing away. There was no way he was going over there. Queen Laura had never liked him to begin with, and she often showed signs of wanting to kill him. Now, in this desolate place, with no other zombies around to intervene, what if she really decided to kill him? And no, I'm good. Since you're here, I'll just head out now, Big Ears stammered, already turning to run. His legs moved fast, and he bolted without looking back. Every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder, relieved to see that Laura wasn't chasing him. Still, he didn't dare slow down. He kept running until he was out of the graveyard and back on the city streets. The sight of wandering zombies around him finally gave him a sense of safety. Phew. Big Ears let out a long breath, feeling like a weight had been lifted off his chest. He slowed his pace, though his disheveled appearance made it clear he'd been spooked. Hey, what's got you running around like a headless chicken? A female zombie's voice suddenly rang out beside him. Big Ears' nerves, which had just started to relax, immediately tensed up again. His brow furrowed as he whipped his head around. And there she was, Laura's face staring right at him. C124 I wasn't done punching it yet. Queen Laura. Big Ears was so startled that he stumbled back 2 steps. What are you doing here? Why wouldn't I be here? The real question is, why are you still hanging around? Laura replied with obvious disdain, clearly not thrilled to see him. Wait, weren't you just at the graveyard? Big Ears asked hurriedly. Laura looked at him like he was crazy. I was at the graveyard earlier, but I've been back for a while now. Big Ears frowned deeply at her response. He knew Queen Laura was fast, but this felt like she was messing with him. Something wasn't right. Something was definitely off. There had to be a problem at the graveyard. Even though Big Ears couldn't figure out what was going on, he decided it was best to report this to Ethan. Back at the house, Ethan listened to Big Ears' account. He wasn't particularly surprised. Issues popping up in newly expanded territory weren't exactly unheard of. Still, this situation was odd. Big Ears swore he'd seen 2 Lauras, but Laura insisted she hadn't seen him at the graveyard at all. She chalked it up to Big Ears' imagination. Now, the 2 of them were downstairs, still arguing about it. Ethan, curious about the whole thing, decided to check it out for himself. With a single thought, his figure vanished from the room. The next moment, he appeared on the street below. The bickering Laura and Big Ears immediately fell silent when they saw him. Boss, I swear everything I said is true. Every word. I'm not lying to you, Big Ears said, rushing forward. But I didn't see him at the graveyard, Laura countered. Nearby, the burly bulldozer was watching the drama unfold, chuckling to himself. Maybe you got possessed or something, Laura. Maybe you saw him but didn't realize it. Do I look like you? Laura shot back, clearly annoyed. Enough, Ethan said, cutting through the noise. Let's go check it out and settle this. The group of zombie kings nodded in agreement and followed Ethan as he led the way toward the graveyard at the edge of their territory. By now, the sun had fully set, and the sky was a dull, oppressive gray. A cold wind swept through the streets of the post-apocalyptic city, howling as it passed. Terrifying zombies roamed the streets, but when they saw Ethan, they all bowed their heads in submission, showing him the utmost respect. The group crossed the river bridge and arrived at the edge of their new territory. Ahead of them stretched a dense forest, the mountains looming in the distance. In the dim light, the forest looked pitch black, the trees swaying in the wind like shadowy figures beckoning them closer. Gravestones stood scattered across the clearing ahead, lonely and desolate, exuding an eerie sense of abandonment. Boss, it was right there. Big Ears pointed to a spot in the middle of the gravestones. That's where I saw her earlier this afternoon. But there's nothing here, Laura said, her sharp eyes scanning the area. Bulldozer scratched his head. Big Ears, are you sure you weren't the one possessed? Maybe you just imagined it. Ethan ignored their banter, focusing instead on his surroundings. He extended his senses, but there was no sign of any living presence nearby. The area was completely silent, unnaturally so. And yet, there was a faint feeling. Something was here, lurking just out of sight. Ethan stepped forward, his gaze falling on two zombie corpses lying among the gravestones. They looked freshly dead. Their deaths were strange. Their bodies were completely intact, with no visible injuries. But their skin was covered in grotesque, tumor-like growths. The growths were dark red, uneven, and bumpy, almost like clusters of warts. They were so densely packed that they covered nearly the entire surface of the corpses, some even layered on top of each other. Just looking at them was enough to trigger a sense of revulsion. Continue reading at my virtual library empire. What the hell is this? Ethan muttered. With a wave of his hand, Itachi appeared in his grip. He raised the blade and sliced into one of the largest growths. To everyone's surprise, there was no explosion of blood or gore. Instead, the inside of the growth was white, with a texture resembling mushroom fibers. Fungus. Ethan thought to himself. It seemed these zombies had been killed by some kind of parasitic infection. Fungi weren't part of the animal or plant kingdoms, they existed in their own strange, parallel domain. But before he could think further, a figure suddenly staggered out of the dark forest. It was thin, with disheveled short hair and a horrifying face. And yet, that face was identical to Laura's. Look, there it is. Big Ears shouted, pointing with a trembling hand before quickly retreating behind the other zombie kings in fear. Laura tilted her head, her sharp, menacing eyes narrowing as she studied the figure. It really did look exactly like her, down to the clothes. Well, I'll be damned. There really is one. Rah. The fake. Laura let out a raspy growl and began shambling toward them, step by step. Oh, come on, look at you acting all tough. Bulldozer muttered, completely unfazed. Unlike the others, he hadn't evolved the capacity for fear, so he wasn't the least bit intimidated. Boss, I've been wanting to knock her down a peg for ages. Let me handle this. Ethan nodded calmly. Go ahead. Quote question mark. The real Laura turned to Ethan, her face full of question marks. What did he mean by that? Before she could say anything, Bulldozer's massive frame surged forward. With just a few powerful strides, he closed the distance and swung a heavy fist at the fake Laura. His speed was incredible, and with his enhanced strength, the punch packed a devastating amount of force. Bam! The punch landed squarely on the fake Laura's face, sending her flying around 10 feet. But to everyone's surprise, her head didn't explode, nor did her bones shatter. Instead, her face caved in like it was made of rubber or clay. Huh, tough little thing, aren't you? Bulldozer grinned and charged again, pinning the fake Laura to the ground. He began pummeling her relentlessly, his fists slamming down like hammers. It was clear that the imposter wasn't very strong, probably just barely at AB rank level. Against Bulldozer, she didn't stand a chance. Even Big Ears, if he'd mustered the courage, could have taken her down. But his fear of the real Laura had kept him from making a move earlier. In no time, Bulldozer had beaten the fake Laura into an unrecognizable mess. With one final, thunderous punch, there was a loud crack as her head finally burst open. But instead of blood and flesh, her insides were filled with white, thread-like fibers. Unbothered, Bulldozer grabbed the remains and tore them apart like he was ripping up a piece of foam. Boss, all done. Bulldozer announced proudly, standing over the shredded remains. Ethan nodded, his expression calm and thoughtful. Big Ears squinted at the remains, his fear now replaced by curiosity. What was that thing? And how did it manage to look just like Laura? Probably some kind of mutated fungus, Ethan replied, though he didn't sound entirely sure. The source of the fungus isn't in the graveyard, it's deeper in the forest. If we go far enough, we might find the root of the problem. The zombie kings scratched their heads in confusion. They'd heard of mutated plants and mutated beasts, but mutated fungi. That was new. Ethan, however, was more concerned. While the creature wasn't particularly strong, it was still a potential threat. If left unchecked, it could become a bigger problem down the line. The issue was that fungi weren't like vines or trees, they didn't have a single root to trace back to. That made dealing with them much trickier. Forget it. Let's head back for now, Ethan said, turning to leave. All right, Bulldozer replied, though he sounded a little disappointed. I wasn't done punching it yet. Laura shot him a sideways glance, her expression growing darker the more she thought about it. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with her. Without warning, she raised one of her sharp claws and, with a swift, stabbed Bulldozer right in the butt. Ah! Bulldozer's scream echoed through the graveyard. C-125. That seemed too easy. Ethan stepped into his apartment as night fully descended. The crescent moon hung like a silver hook on the horizon, surrounded by a sea of twinkling stars. It had been 3 months since the apocalypse began. Without human pollution, the environment had improved significantly. Now, whenever he looked up, he could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky. At that moment, a few meteors streaked across the night. The area around Ethan's high-rise was eerily quiet. Nothing unusual seemed to be happening. With some time to kill, Ethan pulled out his phone to gather intel and check on recent events. Santa Clarita shelter breached by unidentified organisms. Suspected parasitic creatures capable of laying eggs inside human hosts. These eggs feed on flesh and blood, eventually maturing and bursting out of the body. Wow, starting off with a bang, huh? Ethan muttered to himself. The announcement was from an official shelter bulletin. A shelter had been overrun. Below the announcement were several attached photos. The images showed researchers in white lab coats, their bodies drenched in blood. Their abdomens had been torn open, leaving gaping holes. They lay sprawled on the ground in grotesque positions, their deaths horrifyingly gruesome. Around the corpses, there was a mix of slime and blood, pooling together in a nauseating mess. Aliens, Ethan remarked, unfazed. His only thought was how wasteful it was to ruin perfectly good food. If you're going to eat, at least do it properly. The comments under the announcement were plentiful, filled with mourning and a shared sense of dread. It was the kind of fear that came from knowing that what happened to others could just as easily happen to you. Stay connected with my virtual library empire. As the apocalypse dragged on, new monsters kept appearing. Humanity's situation grew increasingly dire. No one knew when death might come knocking on their own door. Ethan scrolled further down. Researchers discovered a meteorite in a remote forest. Upon analysis, they found insect eggs inside. This post had its own flood of comments. Oh my god. Those eggs must be alien lifeforms. What if it's like venom? I'm not spreading rumors, but I'll wait for the experts to spread them for me. Quote. Fortunately, none of these incidents were happening in Los Angeles, so they didn't concern Ethan for now. He decided to check the Genesis Biotech website. But to his disappointment, there were no updates. The same old announcements were still there. Things had been unusually quiet lately. Yeah, right. Quiet means they're up to something shady. Ethan muttered under his breath. He couldn't help but wonder what they were working on. Meanwhile, deep in the forest behind a cemetery, the shadows of trees swayed in the pitch-black night. At the base of several large trees, clusters of fleshy red growths were sprouting. They were packed tightly together, pulsating faintly. The red growths began to shift and squirm, slowly merging into a humanoid shape. Before long, the figure wobbled to its feet. Its features started to take form, its face becoming sharp and defined, strikingly handsome. Clothing materialized on its body, a crisp white shirt. The red growths had transformed into an exact replica of Ethan. At first glance, it was indistinguishable from the real Ethan, though its expression was slightly stiff, lacking the calm, detached air of the original. The tall figure began walking out of the forest. But this time, it didn't head toward Ethan's territory. Instead, it circled around to another area. Emerging from the woods, it stepped onto the darkened streets of the city. In the shadows, a few zombies wandered aimlessly. Among them were two that had evolved to a higher state, retaining a faint trace of intelligence. You two, come here, the fake Ethan said in a low, deliberate voice. The zombies growled softly, their throats emitting guttural sounds. Obediently, they shuffled over, even displaying a hint of servility. But with a wave of the fake Ethan's hand, countless spores were released into the air. The spores drifted toward the zombies, entering their bodies through their mouths, noses, and ears. A guttural roar erupted from the two zombies. Rog. Their bodies froze mid-motion, then began to convulse violently. Within seconds, they collapsed to the ground, lifeless. From their corpses, red fleshy growths began to sprout, spreading at an alarming rate. The tumors multiplied rapidly, layer upon layer, until they covered the bodies entirely. Some of the larger growths even sprouted smaller ones, creating a grotesque, pulsating mass that would make anyone's skin crawl. This form is proving to be quite effective, Ethan remarked, clearly possessing intelligence and appearing satisfied with his handiwork. It continued walking forward, releasing spores as it went, spreading its influence further. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of a distant high-rise, a woman stood, her sharp eyes locked onto the scene below. Her gaze was intense, unwavering. He's here, she exclaimed. Captain, what's he doing? A male teammate beside her asked, his voice tinged with unease. The woman furrowed her brows, deep in thought. It looks like he's spreading something. Damn, that's seriously creepy. The man muttered, his expression one of shock and disgust. They both watched as more zombies approached the fake Ethan, only to collapse in spasms moments later, their deaths as horrifying as the first two. Could this be what Nathan referred to as the absolute domain? The woman wondered aloud, her mind racing. The phenomenon matched the descriptions in their intel. Low-level zombies couldn't even get close to him before succumbing. The group's tension was palpable. They were on high alert, as if facing a deadly predator. This was Jessica's team, a squad tasked with assassinating Ethan. They had been monitoring his territory for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Hundreds of drones had been deployed to surveil the area 24/7, ensuring they wouldn't miss a single movement. The moment Ethan, or what they thought was Ethan, appeared, they were ready. Captain, what's the plan? The male teammate asked, his voice steady but eager. Jessica didn't hesitate. We attack. Hit him hard and fast before he has a chance to react. Take him out in one strike. Got it. The others nodded in agreement. It was the best strategy. Catch him off guard and end him swiftly. The team moved with precision, silently positioning themselves for an ambush. They waited, hidden, as the fake Ethan continued to approach, oblivious to their presence. Good. His perception doesn't seem very sharp, Jessica observed, analyzing his behavior. As Ethan reached the street below, her eyes sharpened with determination. Get ready, she commanded. The team held their breath, their energy building. One of the male teammates began to channel his power, heat radiating from his hands as a massive fireball started to form. The air around him shimmered with the intensity of the energy he was gathering. The fireball grew larger and larger, until it was nearly 7 feet in diameter, a blazing orb of destruction, like a miniature sun. The man poured 2/3 of his energy into this single attack, determined to make it count. Now, Jessica shouted. The man raised his hand and hurled the fireball downward with all his might. The fake Ethan, sensing something, suddenly looked up. It tilted its head, its expression shifting as it noticed the massive fireball descending from above. The fiery glow reflected in its eyes, growing brighter and larger as the fireball closed in. Boom. The fireball struck its target with devastating force, exploding on impact. The blast sent shockwaves rippling through the area, shattering every window in the vicinity. Flames engulfed the fake Ethan, consuming its form entirely. Jessica narrowed her eyes, watching the scene intently. That seemed too easy, she muttered, her instincts telling her not to let her guard down. This zombie king has a ridiculously strong body. Keep attacking, she ordered. Understood. Her teammates responded without hesitation. They unleashed a barrage of abilities, each pouring their energy into the assault. Fireballs, lightning strikes, and other elemental attacks rained down on the explosion site, ensuring no chance of survival for their target. The street below was a chaotic inferno of destruction. Smoke and debris filled the air as the team continued their relentless assault.